Oh, Wikipedia. Literally the Library of Alexandria that you should definitely go donate to because donating to them helps a great deal and I donate monthly myself. But that's for a different time. Definitely, Wikipedia has a lot of very bizarre articles. Half of these, or at least half of the physical appearance of this iceberg, I covered last week. The link to that will be up top. The rest of them will be right here, baby. So, buckle your fuckles, get ready to be bamboozled, confused, and really getting bizarre with it because we're putting the glizzy on them and diving right on in. Starting this video off with just straight up sexual assault, Concho. Concho is a prank performed by clasping the hands together in the shape of an imaginary gun and attempting to poke an unsuspecting victim's ass, often while explaining Concho. It is a common prank among children in East Asian countries such as Japan. In Korea, it's called dongchu. In China, it's called qiansha, which was derived from the jutsu technique in the manga and anime series Naruto. You know, the 1000 Years of Death jutsu. The word is a slang adoption of the Japanese word for enema, concho. In accordance with widespread practice, the word is generally written in katakana when used in its slang sense, and in kanji when used for enemas in the medical sense. In English-speaking countries, the prank is known as goosing. Okay then, let's get on to the next one. Grizzly polar bear hybrid. What this explanation is about to be is literally in the fucking name. It is a grizzly and polar bear hybrid, also named growler bear, pizzly bear, grizzler, or nanalook. I'm sorry, let me just bounce back to pizzly bear. That's funny as fuck. That's such a stupid name. Now, this is a rare hybrid that has occurred both in captivity and in the wild. In 2006, the occurrence of this hybrid nature was confirmed by the testing of DNA of a unique-looking bear that had been shot near Sax Harbor, Northwest Territories, on Bakes Island in the Canadian Arctic. The number of confirmed hybrids has since risen to 8, all of them descending from the same female polar bear, who obviously likes BBC, brown bear cock. The possible wild-bred polar bear grizzly bear hybrids have been reported and shot in the past, but DNA tests were not available to verify the bear's ancestry. And why do the bears need verification to begin with if it's like 1953 and you just shot a fucking bear? Genetic analysis has revealed multiple instances of intragression hybridization between bear species, including introgression of polar bear DNA into brown bears during the Pleistocene era. Grizzly bear is a common name for Ursus arctos, where brown bear is used internationally, and in science to refer to the species as a whole. With several suspected sightings and 8 confirmed cases, theories of how such hybrids might naturally occur have become more than hypothetical. Although these sister species often occupy adjacent regions, direct contact has not been the norm, because polar bears hunt, breed, and sometimes even make maternity dens on sea ice, whereas brown bears are not about that ocean bullshit. Now, of course, there is the 2006 discovery in which Jim Martell, a hunter from Idaho, reportedly shot a grizzly polar bear hybrid near Sax Harbor on Bank Island, Northwest Territories, on April 16, 2006. Martell, with his local guide, Roger Tutana, had been hunting for polar bears and killed the animal believing it to be a normal polar bear, but officials took interest in the creature after noticing that while it had the thick, creamy white fur of typical polar bears, it also had long claws, a humped back, a sallow face, and brown patches around its eyes, back, and feet, which are all traits of grizzly bears. If the bear has been adjusted to be a grizzly, the hunter would have faced a possible 1,000 Canadian dollar fine and up to a year in jail. But a DNA test conducted by Wildlife Genetics International in British Columbia confirmed it was a hybrid with a polar bear mother and grizzly bear father. This is the first documented case in the wild, though it was known that this hybrid was biologically possible, and other ursid hybrids have been bred in the zoo in the past. On May 8, 2006, the discovery of the grizzly polar bear hybrid received attention when soon after the story was announced, a comedy television show, The Colbert Report, lightheartedly named the new species as the #1 threat to American security. And I mean, can you blame them? Look at that. Look at that bear right there. Yeah, this one. Goofy ass motherfucker. Later, on April 8, 2010, David Kuptana, an involute hunter from the community of, I'm not even going to try to say that, on Victoria Island, shot what he thought was a polar bear. And just like last time, in which Roger Kuptana discovered that this wasn't a fucking polar bear, same shit happened. The bear's mother was a grizzly polar bear hybrid, and the father was a grizzly bear, so better be afraid, they're breeding now! The bear possesses physical characteristics intermediate between grizzlies and polar bears, such as brown fur on its paws, long claws, and a grizzly-like head. Between 2012 and 2014, another 6 hybrid bears were either killed by hunters or live captured by biologists. Samples were collected from all 6, and genetic analysis confirmed both their hybrid status and their family relationships. 8 hybrids identified to date include the first generation F1 50/50, and 4 grizzly bear backcross individuals 75/20 grizzly to polar bear, and a single F1 female was a mother of all 4 backcross individuals. And a single female polar bear was a mother of all 4 F1s, and thus a grandmother of all 4 backcross polar bears. 2 male grizzlies mated with the female polar bear to give the 4 F1s, with 1 grizzly bear apparently mating with the polar bear in 2 different years. 2 of the F1s are full siblings, but born 3 years apart. The 2 male brown bears both mated with the F1 female to produce the 4 backcross individuals, with 3 littermates being sired by 1 male, and a single older 3/4 grizzly bear coming from mating between the F1 female and her father. Get the banjos! It's hard to know whether these events are a harbinger of a breakdown of the species barrier or just an unusual anecdote, since all confirmed cases to a date trace to the unusual mate choice of a single polar bear. There is also, of course, the Arviat bear. It was widely reported that a bear shot in 2016 near Arviat on the western shore of the Hudson Bay was a hybrid, with new agencies going so far as to describe it as the outcome of climate change. Which makes sense. Hey, if all of your polar bear friends are fucking dying, then fucking the brown bears that are on land makes sense. But this bear was light in color. But blonde grizzly bears are common on the barren grounds, and the Arviat bear did not have other features of characteristic hybrids. The Arviat bear was subsequently confirmed by genetic analysis to be a pure brown bear. Now, although the grizzly bear was killed on Banks Island in 1951, it had until recently been rare for this species to stray this far from the north coast of mainland Canada. In 1991, 1 or more grizzly bears were documented hunting seals and polar bears on the ice near Melville Island, over 500 kilometers from the mainland coast. In 2003 and 2004, a geological team working on Melville Island obtained photographic and DNA evidence of a grizzly bear in the area. The report also collected information on several other sightings in the Canadian Arctic archipelago, which also makes sense, you know, when shit warms up. Brown bears can go there. Grizzly bears have apparently also been extending their range east across the barren grounds towards Hudson Bay and south towards the Saskatchewan and Manitoba. Between 2003 and 2008, several individuals were spotted in Wampuk National Park, south of Churchill, Manitoba, an area used by polar bears for maternity dens and as a refuge during the ice-free season of the Hudson Bay. Now, there is, of course, a great deal about ancient hybridization, which is a genetic method used to confirm the family relationships and ancestry of the hybrid bears from northern Canada, which date back to the early 1990s and are not powerful enough to reveal ancient history. However, the newer methods of genomics analyze thousands of sites in the genome, allowing the history of individual fragments of chromosomes to be traced back to particular populations or species in the case of hybridization. Genomic studies of brown bears and polar bears have revealed that the gene flow from polar bears into brown bears, but not the other way around. This also happened during another period in history that was way the fuck back, but I have rambled on about polar bear sex for far too long. So what do you need to know? TLDR. Polar bear likes BBC, Big Brown Bear Cock. So, BBBC. On to the next one. Gombe Chimpanzee War. Oh my fucking god, I have been waiting to talk about the fucking monkey warfare since I saw this goddamn iceberg. This is the entry that made me choose this for a video. I looked at that and thought, holy shit, monkey warfare? That's awesome! Which it is, so let's talk about it. Now to the background of the Gombe Chimpanzee War. Prior to the 4-year war, it became a national park. Before then, that is. Gombe Stream National Park was known as the Gombe Stream Research Center. The park is located in a lower region of the Kakombe Valley, which is known for its primate research opportunities first taken advantage of by researcher Jane Goodall, who served as a director of the Gombe Stream Research Center. The site itself is composed of steep slopes of open woodland rising above the stream valleys, lush with riverine forests. The chimpanzees roamed across these hills in territorial communities, which divided the chimpanzees into parties ranging from 1 to 40 members. The term Kasakela refers to one of 3 areas of research in the Central Valley, with the Kasakela in the north, the Kakombe, and the Menke in the south. Evidence of territorialism was first documented once Goodall followed the chimpanzees in their feeding situations, noting their aggressive territorial behavior, but she did not foresee the up-and-coming conflict. After the succession of the Kasakela community, the newly formed Kahama were led by the brother Duo Hugh and Charlie, with the other males being Godi, D, Goliath, and the young Sniff. The Kasakela males consisted of Figan, Satan, Sherry, Everett, Roldoff, Chomeo, and Humphrey. Interesting names we have here. First blood was drawn by the Kasakela community on January 7, 1974, when a party of 6 adult Kasakela males consisting of Humphrey, Figan, Jomeo, Sherry, Everett, and Rodolph ambushed the isolated Kahama male, Godi, while he was feeding on a tree. This was the first time that any of the chimpanzees had been seen to deliberately kill a fellow chimpanzee. Now, after they had slain Godi, the victorious chimpanzees celebrated boisterously, throwing and dragging branches with hoots and screams. After Godi fell, D was taken out next, then Hugh. Later on came the elderly Goliath. Throughout the war, Goliath had been relatively friendly with the Kasakela neighbors when encounters occurred. However, his kindness was not reciprocated as he fucking died. Packwatch. R.I.P. and piss. Only 3 Kahama males remained, Charlie, Sniff, and Willy Wally, who was crippled from fucking polio. Without a chance to strike back, Charlie was killed next. After his death, Willy Wally disappeared and was never found. The last remaining Kahama male, young Sniff, survived for over a year. For some time, it seemed as if he might escape into a new community or be welcomed back into the Kasakelas, but this did not occur. Sniff, too, fell to the Kasakela warband. Of the females from Kahama, 1 was killed, 2 went missing, and 3 were beaten and fucking kidnapped. Kasakela then succeeded in taking over Kahama's former territory. These territorial gains were not permanent, however. With the Kahama gone, the Kasakela territory was now butted up against the territory of another chimpanzee community called the Kalande. Cowed by the superior strength and the numbers of the Kalande, as well as a few violent skirmishes along their border, the Kasakela quickly gave up much of their new territory. Furthermore, when they moved back northward, the Kasakela were harassed by Mitumba foragers, who also outnumbered the Kasakela community. Probably would have helped if they didn't kill some of their own. Eventually, his hostilities died down, and the regular order of things was restored. Now, of course, there's the effects on Goodall, because disregard those near-sentient creatures that fucking killed each other in the same way that every stupid-ass monkey that has acquired sentience will do. Let's talk about the stupid-ass monkey who was writing shit down, Jane Goodall. The outbreak of the war came as a disturbing shock to Goodall, who had previously considered chimpanzees to be, although similar to human beings, rather nicer in their behaving. Ha! Wrong! Nope! Coupled with the observation in 1975 of cannibalistic infanticide by a high-ranking female in the community, the violence of the Gombe War, revealed to Goodall the dark side of chimpanzee behavior. She was profoundly disturbed by this revelation, and in her 1990 memoir, Through a Window, My 30 Years with the Chimpanzees of Gombe, she wrote, "For several years I struggled to come to terms with this new knowledge. Often when I woke in the night, horrific pictures sprang unbidden to my mind. Satan, one of the apes, cupping his hand below Sniff's chin, to drink the blood that welled from a great wound on his face. Old Rodolph, usually so benign, standing upright to hurl a 4-pound rock at Godey's prostrate body. Jomio staring a strip of skin from Dee's thigh. Figan charging and hitting again and again the stricken, quivering body of Goliath, one of his childhood heroes." Yeah, it's pretty disgusting shit. Monkey War. When Goodall reported the events of the Gombe Chimpanzee War, her account of a naturally occurring war between chimpanzees was not universally believed. We're the only monkeys stupid enough to kill each other, goddammit! At the time, scientific models of human and animal behavior were virtually never overlapped. Some scientists accused her of excessive anthropomorphism. Others suggested that her presence and her practice of feeding the chimpanzees had created violent conflict in a naturally peaceful society. But I guess these people were all simply too arrogant and ignorant to realize that simian creatures will have simian traits like tendencies to warfare. Truly, there is nothing more arrogant than a group of scientists in one room, which is not to call them stupid, not to disrespect science as a whole, but the people I have met who study natural sciences tend to also have a major god complex, which some of them should work on. Now, a 2018 study published in the American Journal of Physical Anthropology concluded that the Gombe War was most likely the consequence of a power struggle between 3 high-ranking males, which was exacerbated by an unusual scarcity of fertile females. Makes sense, right? Beringen City. Beringen City is a mythical city that is said to be invisible and lie between Gandara, Torangan, and Papasangan in the Samar province of the Philippines. The city is said to be located in the province of Samar. It is also designated as a barangay of Pagasan, Samar, and Gondra, Samar. According to the local folklore, the population of Barangan comprises of supernatural beings, the Encantos, enchanted beings, and their progeny with humans. The Encantos were described as shape-changers who can take human form, and in their human form, they're said to lack a philtrum between their nose and lips. The city also is alleged to contain treasures of gold. A small number of people claim to have seen the city, and some seafarers claim to have seen a city of dazzling light on moonless nights for a few minutes. According to folk stories, most people who claim to have seen the city are victims of demon possession. Alright, that's a weird one to read. There are reports of satellite images from a Japanese company that allegedly show brightly lit tracts of land in the region, which led the Japanese to believe that there are rich deposits of gold and uranium in the suspected area. They began work immediately, setting up the large work site in the town of San Jorge, but mysterious accidents and mishaps plagued the project from the start, forcing the Japanese company to shut down the operation and abandon the project completely in an effort to avoid bankruptcy and cut their losses. Popobawa. Delving back into some cryptid territory here, Popobawa, also known as Popobawa but with the space, is the name of an evil spirit or shaitani, which is believed by the residents of Zanzibar to have first appeared on one of the Tanzanian island of Pemba. In 1995, it was the focus of a major outbreak of mass hysteria or panic which spread from Pemba to Unguja, the main island of the Zanzibar archipelago, and across to Dar es Salaam and other urban centers on the East African coast. Popobala is a Swahili name which translates literally as batwing, from Swahili for popo, bat, and bawa, wing. This name is said to have originated as a description of the dark shadow cast by the spirit when it attacks at night. It does not refer to the actual form of the spirit, which is liable to change. Swahili speakers also use a plural form of the name Mapopobawa to refer to multiple manifestations of the feared spirit. This plural is anglicized as Popobawas because the English can't do other languages, I guess. Popobawa is a shapeshifter and described as taking different forms, not just that of a bat as its name implies. It can take either human or animal form and metamorphose from one form to the other. Popobawa typically visits homesteads at nights, but it can also be seen in the daytime. It is sometimes associated with the presence of sulfurous odor, but this is not always the case. Popobawa attacks men, women, and children, and may attack all the members of a household before passing on to another house in the neighborhood. Its nocturnal attacks can comprise of a single physical assault and or poltergeist-like phenomena, but most feared is sexual assault and the anal rape of men and women. Yikes. Victims are often urged to tell others that they have been assaulted, and are threatened with repeated visits by Popobawa if they do not. During Popobawa panics, many people try to guard against attack by spending the night awake outside of their houses, often huddled around an open fire with other family members and neighbors. Panics most occur often in Zanzibar, throughout the island of Pemba, and the north and west of Unguja Island, including Zanzibar City. Episodes have also been reported in Dar es Salaam and other towns on the mainland coast of Tanzania. As legendary creatures go, Popobawa is of fairly recent origin. Sightings of the Popobawa can only go back about 40 years, and Parkins states that the first reports date to 1965 on the island of Pemba, appearing shortly after that island's political revolution. Better-known sightings followed in 1970, and the creature resurfaced periodically in the 1980s, reaching a peak in the 1995. 5 years passed without a sighting, but the Popobawa appeared briefly in 2000 and again in 2007. A popular origin story of Popobawa proposes that the 1970s angry sheik released a jinn to take vengeance on his neighbors. The sheik lost control of the jinn, who took to demonic ways. It has been argued because of Zanzibar's past as an Arab-run slave market, the story of Popobawa is an articulated social memory of the horrors of slavery. Many of the legends on Zanzibar came from colonizers and traders of the past, including Arabs, Portuguese, Chinese, Indians, Britons, Persians, and Africans. Reports of Popobawa attacks rise and fall with the election cycle in Zanzibar. Very interesting. Although victims argue Popobawa is apolitical. Popobawa reports rose dramatically relatively recently in 1995. A further spate of attacks was reported in Dar es Salaam in 2007. One explanation put forth for the election cycle connection is the claim that Popobawa's vengeful ghost of an assassinated President Abed Karume, or was summoned by the Chama Cha Mapinduzi political party. Villagers maintain that Popobawa becomes enraged if its existence is denied, and Popobawa allegedly spoke to a group of villagers on Pemba in 1971 through a girl possessed by the monster. The girl, called Fatuma, spoke in a man's deep voice, and then villagers say they heard the sound of a car revving or rustling on a nearby roof. Many of those islands believe in exorcisms and place charms on the base of thick trees or sacrifice goats. Benjamin Radford interviewed doctors at Zanzibar Medical Group, Zanzibar's main hospital, and none reported ever treating Popobawa victims. After the incidents involving the Popobawa in 1995, there was reported an article was published in the Skeptical Inquirer by Joel Nickel regarding the phenomena. In the article, Nickel compared the experiences and described a visit from Popobawa with the symptoms of a waking dream, also known as sleep paralysis or hypnopompic or hypnagogic hallucination. Nickel went on to describe some of the symptoms of a waking dream as feeling weighted down or even paralyzed. Alternately, one may float or have an out-of-body experience. Other characteristics include extreme vividness of the dream and or bizarre and terrifying content. Nickel also compared these symptoms with those experienced by people who claim to have been attacked by an incubi, succubi, or hags from Western folklore. This waking dream, of course, is also related to alien abductions, and a book released in 2017 entitled Popobawa, Tansian Talk, and Global Misreadings by Katrina Daly Thompson was critical of Nicholl, claiming that he was associating Zanzibaris with fear and Westerners with skepticism. Nicholl noted that he agrees Westerners should be wary of imposing simplistic patterns on another culture, but they should also not shy away from making scientific observations where appropriate. Now, of course, there is a few pop culture reference. The show Secret Saturdays in the episode The King of Kumari Kingdom has it. In 2008, it was featured on an episode of the American paranormal reality television series Destination Truth titled Bat Demon, and one of the stories in Mame Bagua's Diane's Dark Moons Rising on a Starless Night centers around the Popobawa. Hippo Eats Dwarf. Hippo Eats Dwarf is the title of a news article which claims that a dwarf was accidentally eaten by a hippopotamus. The urban legend has been circulating via the internet since the mid-1990s, and many print newspapers have been fooled into publishing the story as fact. The story goes that a freak accident occurred at a circus during an act involving a dwarf bouncing on a trampoline. The dwarf jumped sideways off the trampoline just at the moment a hippopotamus began to yawn. The dwarf landed in the hippo's yawning mouth and was abruptly and accidentally swallowed whole. The audience applauded until they realized this was not part of the show and the true horror set in. Ewan Ferguson, writing in The Observer in 2003, said the story is a marvelous metaphor for the reality life is not safe and you can't plan for disaster. The hippo can get you at any time. Now, according to Snopes, the hoax news story began circulating on the internet with an Ansenet post in 1994. The post was allegedly taken from National Lampoon magazine, which in turn, according to Snopes, attributed to the Las Vegas Sun. However, according to Alex Boas, the story cannot be found in back issues of either the Sun or the National Lampoon. The original story was set in an Austrian circus. The hippo was named Hilda and the dwarf was named Franz Dosh. In 1999, a new version of the story appeared in the Pattaya Mail in Thailand. The setting had changed to northern Thailand and the hippo was called Odd. The Pattaya Mail story was republished by several Australian papers, including the Daily Telegraph, the Advertiser, and the Sunday Mail. The story reached the UK and the Manchester Evening News, but as we all know, the story isn't exactly true. Now, in comedy, Carl Pillington of The Ricky Gervais Show once told this story in a segment called Educating Ricky in 2002, which Carl believed the story to be true. This led to both Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant laughing hysterically. Comedian Louis Black references it in a joke during a stand-up appearance, and comedy site Funny or Die published a comedic version of the story in 2009. There is, of course, a book entitled Hippo Eats Dwarf, a field guide to hoaxes and other bullshit written by Alex Boas, which takes its name from the popular hoax, and it was published in 2006. Nama. I don't know what this is supposed to be about. I can't explain it, and I can't tell any funny jokes related to how goofy that word looks, because I can't find anything. There's plenty of Nomo or Nama with one M, but I have no fucking idea what Nama is supposed to be. There is, of course, results from Sister Projects, which is a third-person singular past historic of Namer contraction of Nak male in some language that I don't know. I believe Spanish. Yeah, actually, that is Spanish. So I know a little bit of Spanish, but not enough to know what the fuck Nama is. You can see some Wikipedia articles that reference this, and they're all mostly in Spanish. So, yeah, I don't know what they were trying to tell me here, OP that is. I don't know what OP was trying to tell me here, but I can't find Nama. Getting weird with it now, crucifixion in the Philippines. Yeah, you thought Jesus was special? No, he wasn't. Crucifixion was actually a very common torture method used by the Romans. But anyways, let's talk about crucifixion in the Philippines. Crucifixion in the Philippines is a devotional practice held every Good Friday and is part of the local observance of Holy Week. Devotees or penitents called Magdrame in the Campapanagan are willingly crucified in imitation of Jesus Christ's death and his suffering, while related practices include carrying wooden crosses, crawling on rough pavement, and self-flagellation. Penitents consider these acts to be mortification of the flesh and undertake these tasks to ask forgiveness for sins, to fulfill a panada, or in Filipino, translated to English, vow, to express gratitude for favors granted as well. In the most famous case, Ruben Inaje drives 4-inch nails into both hands and feet and then is lifted on a wooden cross for around 5 minutes. I don't know what the fuck he did, but I don't think I want to know. The San Pedro Cutud Latin rites is a reenactment of Christ's Passion and the Crucifixion held in Barangay San Pedro Cutud, San Fernando, Pampanga. It includes a passion play culminating with the actual nailing of at least 3 penitents of 2 wooden crosses atop the makeshift cavalry. Ruben Inaje has been crucified 33 times as of 2019. He began his yearly rite after surviving a fall from a 3-story billboard in 1986. Other penitents crucified with Inaje on Good Friday were Angelo Mengilo, Arnold Menegio, Brian Gomez, Willie Salvador, Angelito Manasala, Johnny Manansala, Marvin Unico, Arnel Stanagan, Victor Capros, Rolando Ocampo, Orlando Valentin, Arnold Reyes, Rolando Banking, and 4 others. And this was, of course, in the year of 2013. My radio just started playing jazz out of the blue. Interesting. Anyway, back into this. Ramil Lazaro, a dishwasher, wheeler, and pedicab driver, also got his share of stainless steel nails, along with 5 penitents on Good Friday at the San Pedro Cutud on Good Friday, April 6, 2012. He expected to take the role of Christ soon, replacing Inaje. Alex Lorraine, 59, who claims to have been crucified every year since 2000, but there's not much else on that. And Arturo Bading, 44, last crucified in 2012, has had 4-inch nails driven through his palms for the first time in Good Friday of 2012. There are also crucifixions held in Barangay Kapitanagan, Pambong, Bulkan, which is a locally known pilgrimage area and haven for faith healers. Many women have been nailed to the cross, acting on directions from above, claiming mediumship of Christ either as Santo Niño or the Black Nazarene. Of these women who have subjected themselves willingly to crucifixion is Percy Valencia, 41, one of a handful of women who were crucified annually, nailed to the cross on 6 of April 2012. Rady Gonzalez of Barangay Estio, Rosario, stayed nailed to the wooden cross for about 10 minutes as a crowd sang Lord's Prayer. Boboy Dioncio, also of Barangay Estio Rosario, nailed for the 9th consecutive year in 2012. He claims receiving a vision of the Virgin Mary giving him 3 nails the first time he underwent crucifixion. He said that every year he saw different visions, which came before Holy Week. John Tenale of Barangay Bolihan, Malios City, on the 6th of April 2012. Rolando Ocampo, 56, who has been crucified every year since 1990 as a sign of his gratitude to God. He says God miraculously saved his wife from difficult childbirth that year, and Ocampo prepares for his crucifixion for days in advance. He spends time alone and engages in deep meditation before the day which he will share with Christ's suffering. John Safram, a 37-year-old Australian media personality and author from Melbourne, who wrote A Long Wig and Tin Crown of Thorns on the 10th of April 2009, and a 15-year-old boy and 18-year-old girl in 2008 who remain unnamed. This is most certainly a strange practice. I find it extremely sus, but hey, I mean, if the people want to do that, I guess they can. Ganesha Milk Drinking Miracle. The Ganesha Drinking Milk Miracle was a phenomenon which occurred on the 21st of September in 1995, in which statues of the Hindu deity Ganesha were thought to be drinking milk offerings. Before the dawn of 21st of September 1995, a worshipper at a temple in South New Delhi made an offering of milk to a statue of Ganesha. When the spoonful of milk from the bowl was held up to the trunk of the statue, the liquid appeared to disappear, apparently taken by the idol. Word of this event spread quickly, and by mid-morning it was found that statues in the entire Hindu pantheon and temples all over India were taking in milk. By noon, the news had spread beyond India, and Hindu temples in the United Kingdom, Canada, UAE, and Nepal, among other countries, had successfully replicated the phenomena. And the Vishva Hindu Parishad, an Indian Hindu nationalistic organization which provides social services to Hindus in Iran and across the world, announced that a miracle was occurring. The reported miracle made significant effects on areas surrounding major temples, vehicle, pedestrian, and traffic. In New Delhi, it was dense enough to create gridlock lasting until late in the evening. Many stores and areas with significant Hindu communities saw a massive jump in sales of milk, and overall milk sales in New Delhi jumped over 30%. Many minor temples struggled to deal with vast increase in numbers, and queues spilled out into the streets, reaching distances of over a mile, of people just wanting to see the milk. Now, of course, many statues were not cooperative. At the famous South Mumbai Ganapati temple, the statues apparently would not drink milk. The bulls and bears at the Delhi Stock Exchange tried to feed milk to a Ganesh idol to no avail. The idol at the Bahadur Shah Zafar Marg shrine would drink fruit and sugarcane juice as easily as milk, and the population of the Siddhivinayak temple decided to close its gates after the statue stopped drinking milk at about 12:30 noon. The sadhus of these temples blamed local atheists for the idols not drinking the milk. Because, if your inanimate object will not drink milk, it's clearly an atheist's fault. The phenomena was also not even limited to Ganesh statues. A week later, on the 27th of September, a statesman reported that the statue of the Virgin Mary in Singapore had also accepted milk. On 28th of September, a report from the Mumbai in the Indian Express said some people had protested when locals offered alcohol to a Gandhi statue, which it had quickly sipped. Bahujan Samaj party workers in the Uttar Pradesh Bhatis district began feeding milk to statues of Ambedkar and Buddha, which they greedily drank up. Seeking to explain the phenomena, Ross McDowell led a team of scientists from India's Ministry of Science and Technology and traveled to a temple in New Delhi and made an offering of milk containing a food coloring. As the level of liquid in the spoon dropped, the scientists hypothesized that after the milk disappeared the spoon, it coated the statue beneath where the spoon was placed. With this result, scientists offered capillary action as an explanation. The surface tension of the milk was pulling the liquid up and out of the spoon before gravity caused it to run down the front of the statue. Prabir Ghosh was one of the people to demonstrate how the Hindus were coaxed into believing the miracle. Sitram Kesri, a labor minister in the Nashirama Rao government, quoted internal reports to say a temple in the Jindwalan Park near the RSS headquarters in Delhi was the epicenter of the miracle. He said it was a ploy by the Hindu nationalistic BJP to gain votes and in the ensuing Lok Sabha elections by spreading false rumors. The phenomena reportedly spread to an organized barrage of late-night telephone calls to Hindu temples all over India and the world, telling them to feed their statues milk. Reports of milk drinking tapered off after the 21st of September, though a few incidents were still reported. A small number of temples outside of India reported the effect continuing for several more days, but no further reports were made after the beginning of October. The story was picked up mostly as a novelty piece by news services around the world, such as CNN, Big Black Cock, The New York Times, and The Guardian. The miracle occurred again on the 20th to 21st of August 2006 in almost exactly the same fashion, but we already had the scientific explanation for it, so why would we rehash that and go over it again when we already know what the answer was? We already took the mask off the killer. Scooby-Doo reference. Baby Train. The Baby Train, or simply Baby Train, is an urban legend in the United States, United Kingdom, and Australia. The legend first appeared in Christopher Morley's 1939 novel Kitty Foyle. According to the legend, a certain small town had an unusually high birth rate. This was allegedly caused by a freight train passing through the town and blowing its whistle, waking up most of the residents. Since it was too late to go back to sleep and too early to get up, couples would have sex, resulting in a mini baby boom. One version of the myth, as written down by the Australian author and folklorist Bill Scott in The Long and the Short and the Tall, a collection of Australian yarns, tells the story of a little town on the coast, not too far north of Sydney, where the birth rate was 3 times the average of the rest of Australia. This was so unusual, the government sent someone out to the town to investigate the cause of the high birth rate. When the official arrived, he found children everywhere he looked. Even the local school had those temporary classrooms all over the place to fit them in, and they had a special maternity wing at the local hospital. The man was mystified for a while. The people there did not seem different from people in other small towns, so he couldn't understand why they got 3 times as many kids. After a few nights into the town, the man figured it out. This particular town was by the main railway line. The train was delivering the mail right past the town and thus blew its whistle when it stopped. Since it was too early to get up and too late to go back to bed, adults had to find something to do while in bed, awaiting. This then led to the very high birth rates, because they played a little game of hide the sausage. This was, of course, without regard to family planning or protection. And the story itself is related to the rumor that birth rates spiked 9 months after the Northeast blackout of 1965. The actual birth rate increase in Boston after the February 1969 nor'easter, the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks, and other natural disasters or similar events. And it's based on the premise that when the regular life is disrupted, adults will resort to sex as entertainment because, hey, making that pussy pop, putting your dick in the slit is pretty entertaining, right? There's a lot of background here and even further reading, but I don't want to read about baby sex more. So on to the next entry. Well, what do you know? We are already 1/4 of the way through the Wikipedia iceberg. Doesn't that make your balls feel heavy and your boobs feel big? I don't fucking know, I'm not you. And it's 4 a.m. I'm trying to come up with something funny here. If you made it this far, thanks. It means the world. Now we're gonna keep going, so buckle your fuckles as we dive even further beyond into level 6. San Pedro Mountains Mummy. The San Pedro Mountains Mummy, known informally as Pedro, but a cute little name, is a mummy discovered in the Wyoming mountain range in the 1930s. Due to its unusual physical features and small stature, which will be shown here. Yeah, look at that graph. Definitely not a meme reference. No, not at all. The San Pedro Mountains Mummy was a little bit weird. It became a part of American folklore as well as UFOlogy and cryptozoology. Mainstream scientific opinion considers Pedro to be the mummy of a malformed infant that was born with anencephaly. In October 1932, while digging for gold in the San Pedro Mountains, carbon-counting Wyoming. Ooh, wow, I just had a stroke. 2 prospectors, Cecil Maine and Frank Carr, blasted their way through some thick rock that had a large vein of gold continued into. When the dust settled, they saw they had opened up a small room, approximately 4 foot tall and 4 foot wide and about 15 feet deep. This is where they said they first saw the mummy of a tiny person. This mummy was examined using x-rays, which determined that it was the body of an anencephalic infant whose cranial deformity gave it the appearance of a miniature adult. A second mummy examined by the University of Wyoming anthropologist George Gill and the Denver Children's Hospital in the 1990s also shown to be an anencephalic infant. DNA testing showed it to be Native American, and radiocarbon dated it to about 1700 AD. According to a July 7, 1979 article in the Casper Star Tribune, the first mummy started debates over whether it was a hoax, a baby, or one of the legendary little people. The mummy ended up in Meeteetse, Wyoming, at a local drugstore where it was shown as an attraction for several years before it was bought by Ivan T. Goodman, a Casper, Wyoming businessman. The mummy was then passed on to Leonard Wadler, a New York businessman, and its present location is unknown. Seeking to prove evolution wrong, an offer of $10,000 was made for the person who finds the missing mummy, according to the Casper Star Tribune. That's weird. Hey yo, we just found this deformed baby, let's disprove evolution. David Vedder. Not to be confused with the politician David Vitter or the organic farmer David Vedder. David Philip Vedder, born September 21st, 1971, and died February 22nd, 1984. Literally 1984. Was an American who was a prominent sufferer of severe combined immunodeficiency, SCID, a hereditary disease which dramatically weakens the immune system. Individuals born with SCID are abnormally susceptible to infections, and exposure to typically innocuous pathogens can be fatal. Vedder was referred to as David the Bubble Boy by the media, a reference to the complex containing system used as part of the management of his SCID. Vedder's surname was not revealed to the general public until 10 years after his death in order to preserve his family's privacy. In his first years, he lived mostly at the Texas Children's Hospital in Houston, Texas, and as he grew older, he lived increasingly at home with his parents and older sister Catherine in Dobbin, Texas. He died in 1984 at the age of 12. Vedder's parents were Carol Ann Vedder and David Joseph Vedder Jr. Their first son, David Joseph Vedder III, was born with SCID and died at 7 months old. Parents advised the Vedders that any future male children they might conceive would have a 50% chance of inheriting the disease. At the time, the only management available for children born with SCID was isolation in a sterile environment until a successful bone marrow transplant could be performed. The Vedders, who had a daughter, decided to proceed with another pregnancy, and their third child, David Philip Vedder, was born on September 21, 1971. A special sterilized cocoon bed was prepared for Vedder at his birth. Immediately after being removed from his mother's uterus, Vedder entered the plastic germ-free environment that would be the home for most of his life. Vedder was a baptized Roman Catholic with sterilized holy water once he had entered the bubble. Initial plans proceeded to get him a bone marrow transplant, and they came to a halt after it was determined that the prospective donor, Vedder's sister, was not a match. Now, of course, regarding life in the bubble, water, air, food, diapers, and clothes were sterilized before they could enter the sterile chamber. Items were placed in a chamber filled with ethylene oxide gas for 4 hours at 60 degrees Celsius, 140 Fahrenheit for those of us in freedom units, and then aerated for a period of 1 to 7 days before being placed in the sterile chamber. After he was placed in the sterile chamber, Vedder was touched only through special plastic gloves attached to the walls of the chamber, which was kept inflated by air compressors that were so loud that communication with David was difficult. His parents and medical team, which included Dr. John Montgomery, sought to provide him as normal a life as possible, including formal education, a television, and playroom inside the sterile chamber. About 3 years after Vedder's birth, the treatment team built an additional sterile chamber in his parents' home in Conroe, Texas, and a transport chamber so that Vedder could spend periods of 2 to 3 weeks at home, with the sister and friends for company. A friend arranged for a special showing of Return of the Jedi at a local theater so that Vedder could attend the movie in his transport chamber. When Vedder was 4 years old, he discovered he could poke holes in his bubble using a butterfly syringe that was left inside the chamber by mistake. And at this point, the treatment team explained to him what germs were and how they affected his condition. As he grew older, he became aware of the world outside his chamber and expressed an interest in participating what he could see outside the windows of the hospital and via television. In 1977, researchers from NASA used their experience with fabrication of spacesuits to develop a special suit that would allow Vedder to get out of his bubble and walk around in the outside world. The suit was connected to his bubble via an 8-foot long cloth tube, and although cumbersome, it allowed him to venture outside without serious risk of contamination. Vedder was initially resistant to the suit, and although he later became more comfortable wearing it, he used it only 7 times. He outgrew the suit and never used the replacement one provided for him by NASA. Approximately $1.3 million was spent on Vedder's care, but scientific study failed to produce a true cure, and no donor match was ever identified. Vedder later received a bone marrow transplant from his sister Catherine, and while his body did not reject the transplant, he became ill with infectious mononucleosis after a few months. He died 15 days later on February 22, 1984, from Burkitt's lymphoma at age 12. The autopsy revealed that Catherine's bone marrow contained traces of a dormant virus, Epstein-Barr, which had been undetectable in the pre-transplant scanning. He was buried at Conroe Memorial Park, Conroe, Montgomery, Texas, on February 25, 1984, next to his older brother, David Joseph Vedder III. In regards to a legacy he left behind, a Conroe ISD elementary school, which opened in 1990 in the Woodlands in unincorporated Montgomery County, Texas, was named David Elementary after Vedder. The Paul Simon song The Boy and the Double was inspired by Vedder's story. In the aftermath of this directly, his parents later divorced. His father became the mayor of Shenandoah, Texas. His mother married Kent Dermott, a magazine reporter who had written about her son. Vedder's psychologist, Mary Murphy, wrote a book about Vedder's case that was to be published in 1995. However, its initial publication was blocked by his parents and by the Baylor College of Medicine. The book was published in 2019 under the title Bursting the Bubble, The Tortured Life and Untimely Death of David Vedder. I can see why they blocked that. That's a very inflammatory name. Kenneth Lamar Noyd. This is so obscure, it doesn't even get its own Wikipedia article. Nope, it is actually just a paragraph in a Wikipedia article. Interesting, huh? Well, do you remember the Noyd? Of course you don't. Most of my viewers are between ages 13 to 24, which means that none of them were alive when the Noyd was around. Shit, I wasn't alive either. I was born in 2003. I am just barely 18 years old. Well, the Noyd was one of those super weird 80s marketing gaps in which a Domino's Pizza character would try and steal your fucking pizza because fuck you! Well, Kenneth Lamar Noyd, but on January 30th, 1989, Kenneth Lamar Noyd, a mentally ill man who thought the ad campaign was a personal attack on himself, entered a Domino's restaurant in Chamblee, Georgia, armed with a .357 Magnum and held two employees hostage for over 5 hours. After telling the employees that Domino's owner Tom Monaghan had stolen his name, he forced them to call Domino's headquarters and demand $100,000 in a white limousine as getaway transportation. Very clever, very good way to get away. After offering in exchange one hostage for a copy of The Widow's Son, Noyd reneged his offer, and police brought him the book. Noyd eventually became hungry and forced the employees to make him 2 special pizzas, and while Noyd ate the pizzas with his gun at his lap, the hostages escaped. Get caught slacking, bozo. Noyd surrendered to police shortly after, and 2 shots were fired by Noyd during this incident. Afterward, Police Chief Reed Miller told reporters he's paranoid. Noyd. He's very irrational, and he's very hard to talk to. Noyd was charged with kidnapping, aggravated assault, extortion, and possession of a firearm during a crime. He was found not guilty for any of this by reason of insanity, though. Noyd spent some time in a mental institution, but died by suicide on February 23, 1995. The incident has been insinuated to have caused Domino's Pizza to discontinue advertising using the Noyd as their mascot. And though this has been rejected by the company and the advertisers, I'd like you to find a better reason other than the fact that the Noyd was kind of just a stupid-ass campaign to begin with. The Licked Hand. Does this name sound familiar? Well, it should, because it's an urban legend that even if you haven't heard the name, you've heard it before. The plot of The Licked Hand is that a very young girl is home alone for the first time with only her dog for company. Listening to the news, she hears of a killer loose in her neighborhood. Terrified, she locks all the doors and windows, but forgets about one. She goes to bed, taking her dog to a room and letting it sleep under her bed. She wakes in the night to hear a dripping sound coming from the bathroom. The dripping noise frightens her, but she's too afraid to get out of bed and find out what it is. To reassure herself, she reaches a hand towards the floor and the dog, and is rewarded by a reassuring lick on her hand. The next morning when she wakes, she goes to the bathroom for a drink of water, only to find her dead, mutilated dog hanging in the shower with his blood slowly dripping into the tiles. On the shower's wall, written in the dog's blood, are the words, "Humans can lick too." Other story variations feature a nearsighted old woman rather than a young girl. The fate of the dog also varies in different versions, with the dog simply being hanged from it to being skinned, disemboweled, or otherwise mutilated. The message is sometimes written on the floor or on the bathroom mirror rather than the wall. Some versions include the parents' return and the discovery of the killer hiding elsewhere in the house, and frequently in the basement, the girl's bedroom closet, or under her bed. In other versions, the girl's parents arrive back in the morning and ask if their daughter had a good night. When she tells them that her dog had kept her calm by licking her hand, she is told that the dog in question had been locked in either the basement or outside. The story usually either ends with the killer never being found and or the girl dying. There is, of course, some background to it, but I've already told you everything you need to know, and we don't need to read about Shonen Jump and Urban Legends Final Cut and The Diary of Mr. Pointner by one M.R. James. So, yeah. Temple OS. Temple OS, formerly J Operating System, Luzthos, and Sparrow OS is a biblical-themed lightweight operating system designed to be the third temple as prophesied in the Bible. It was created by Terry A. Davis, an American programmer who developed it alone over the course of a decade after a series of manic episodes that he described as a revelation from God. The system was characterized as an 86-64-bit Commodore 64 using an interface similar to a mixture of DOS and Turbo C. Davis proclaimed that the system's features, such as the 640x480 resolution, 16-color display, and single-voice audio, were designed according to explicit instructions from God himself. It was programmed with an original variation of C named Holy C in place of BASIC, and included an original flight simulator compiler and kernel. Temple OS was released as J Operating System in 2005 and as Temple OS in 2013, and it was last updated in 2017. For some background on this, Terry A. Davis was born in 1969, and he began experiencing regular manic episodes in 1996, leading him to numerous stays at mental hospitals. Initially diagnosed with bipolar disorder, he was later declared schizophrenic and remained unemployable for the rest of his life. He suffered from delusions of space aliens and government agents that briefly hospitalized him for his mental health issues. And after experiencing a self-prescribed revelation, he proclaimed that he was in direct communication with God, and God told him that the operating system he was to create was for God's third temple. Davis began developing Temple OS circa 2003. One of its early names was the J Operating System, before renaming it to Luzthos, a reference to a scene from the 1986 film Platoon. In 2008, David wrote that Luzthos was primarily for making video games. It had no networking or internet support. As far as I'm concerned, that would be reinventing the wheel. Another name he used was Sparrow OS, before settling on Temple OS in mid-2013. His website had announced at the same time, God's Temple is finished. Now God kills CIA until it spreads. David died after being hit by a train on August 11, 2018, 5 years after his magnum opus. Temple OS itself is a 64-bit, non-preemptive, multitasking, multicolored, public domain, open source, ring zero only, single address space, non-network PC operating system for recreational programming. I would simplify this, but I myself am not computer savvy enough to know what half of this means, so sorry. Now, of course, he says that everything that is in the OS was instructed to him explicitly by God, and he explained the limited resolution was to make it easier for children to draw illustrations of God. The operating system includes an original flight simulator, compiler, and kernel, and one bundled program After Egypt. It's a game in which the player travels to a burning bush to use a high-speed stopwatch. The stopwatch is meant to act as an oracle that generates pseudo-random text, something Davis likened to a Ouija board and a glossolalia. An example of the generated text follows. A monk inside penalty result, perverseness, checked, stated, held, sensation, reasoning, skies, adversity, Dakota, lip, suffer, Approached enact, displacing feast, canst pearl, doing alms, comprehendeth naught. Temple OS was written in a programming language developed by Davis as a middle ground between C and C++, originally called C++. He later renamed this to Holy C, and it doubled as a shell language, enabling the writing and execution of entire applications from within the shell that it operated in. The IDE that comes with Temple OS supports several features, such as embedding images in code. It uses non-standard text format known as doldoc, which has support for hypertext links, images, and 3D meshes to be embedded into what are otherwise standard files. For example, a file can have a spinning 3D model of a tank as a comment in source code. Most code in the OS is JIT compiled and is generally encouraged to use JIT compilation as opposed to creating binaries. Basically, it's used specifically for this one tool. Davis ultimately wrote over 100,000 lines of code for this OS to get it to run, though. Temple OS itself, upon critical reception, received mostly sympathetic reviews. Tech journalist David Castle opined that programming websites tried to find the necessary patience and understanding to accommodate Davis. Tech Republic and OS News published positive articles on Davis's work, even though Davis was banned from the later for hostile comments targeting its readers and staff. In his review for Tech Republic, James Sanders concluded that Temple OS is a testament to the dedication and passion from one man displaying his technological prowess. It doesn't need to be anything more. OS News editor Croc Kamen wrote that the OS shows that computing can still be a hobby. Why is everyone so serious these days? If I want to code an OS that uses interpretive dance as an input method, I should be allowed to do so. Companies like Apple be damned. In 2017, the OS was shown to be part of an outsider art exhibition in Bourgogne, France. Now, unfortunately, Davis died in 2018. I've already stated this. He was hit by a fucking train. Talk about having a train run on ya. After Davis's death, OS News editor Tom Halderla wrote Davis was clearly a gifted programmer. Writing an entire operating system is no small feat, and with that I have to concur. It was sad to see him affected by his mental illness. One fan described Davis as a programming legend, while another computer engineer compared the development of Temple OS to a one-man built skyscraper. This engineer added that it actually boggles my mind that one man wrote all of that, and that it was hard for a layperson to understand what a phenomenal achievement it is to write an entire operating system alone. Temple OS is in the public domain, and Davis's family has wished for fans to donate to the National Alliance for Mental Illness and other organizations working to ease the pain and suffering caused by mental illness. Rest in peace, Terry A. Davis, Monkey Man of Delhi. In May 2001, reports began to circulate in the Indian capital of New Delhi around a strange monkey-like creature that was appearing at the night and attacking people. Eyewitness accounts were often inconsistent, but tended to describe the creature as about 4 feet, 120 centimeters for our European and non-American friends, tall, covered in thick black hair, with a metal helmet, metal claws, glowing red eyes, and 3 buttons on its chest. Others, however, described the monkey man as having a more vulpine snout and being up to 8 feet tall and muscular. It would leap from building to building, and many people report it being scratched. And 2, by some reports even 3 people died when they leapt from the tops of buildings or fell down stairwells in a panic caused by what they thought was the attacker. At one point, exasperated, police even issued artist impressions drawings in an attempt to catch the creature. But of course, the Monkey Man of Delhi is actually most likely to be a case of mass hysteria. Whatever could have caused it is not in this Wikipedia article itself, so as strange as a Wikipedia article is, I will simply have to explain what I think it is myself, and that is, well, when you're alone in the night, things get a little scary. Something goes bump, and it doesn't quite feel right. Sounds that normally wouldn't faze you during the daytime have you quivering in your boots. Your shivers are thoroughly timbered. So if you see, I don't know, a small child or maybe even some kind of animal, or maybe even a fucking small monkey, you're probably gonna trip the fuck out if you're already scared at nighttime. That's just kind of how humans are. We're scared of the dark for a reason. That's because shit that eat you in darkness. Prostitution among animals. Another one of those that I've been fucking hyped to read about. Prostitution among animals. Prostitution among animals is something suggested by a few studies that state that prostitution exists among many different species of non-human animals such as Adiele penguins and chimpanzees. The concept is also known as transactional sex. Penguins use stones for building their nest, and based off of a 1998 study, media reports stated that a shortage of stones led female Adiele penguins to trade sex for stones. Some pair-bonded female penguins copulate with males who are not their mates and then take pebbles for their own nests. Chimpanzees who appear to be trading food for sex have also been described as engaging in prostitution. The notion of such transactional sex among chimpanzees has been critiqued among many scholars, citing that androcentric bias and researchers projecting their own gendered assumptions onto non-human animals may play a significant role in interpretations of prostitution. I digress though, the monkeys do be fucking. Now, of course, prostitution among animals was first reported with the penguins that I brought up, in which, some penguins are simply lesbian and they like to be with other women, but they have to have babies, so they go and fuck a dude and they take his rocks, and yeah, pretty shitty deal for the dude, but hey, you know what? Those female penguins are living their best life, so I respect the grind. There's also chimpanzees, in which a study conducted by the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig, Germany, published online in the Library of Public Science, and this study that they published attempted to support the meat-for-sex behavior hypothesis, according to which early human societies, the best male hunters, had the maximum number of sexual partners. Unable to study early humans, though, researchers studied chimpanzees, and researchers observed chimpanzees in the Thai National Park and concluded that a form of prostitution does exist among the chimpanzees, in which females offer sex to males in exchange for that sweet fucking meat. Talk about a meat-for-meat trade. There is, of course, also something similar amongst capuchin monkeys. A study at the Yale New Haven Hospital that trains capuchin monkeys to use silver discs as money in order to study their economic behavior found that within the rules, these discs could be exchanged by the monkeys for various treats. But the monkeys took this shit and turned it on its head. During one chaotic incident, a researcher observed what appeared to be a monkey exchanging a disc for sex. The monkey that was paid for sex immediately traded the silver disc for a grape. The researchers subsequently took steps to prevent any possibilities of coins being traded for sex, but again, you have to respect the grind. Mans was on his diabolical shit. He said, "Hey, I got that coin, you got that pussy, let's make some shit pop." Win, win, win all around. I don't understand why they stopped this. By all rights, they should have not interfered with the capuchin monkey economy and proceeded to let them have sex. SMH my head. Children of Lulalako. The children of Lulalako, also known as the mummies of Lulalako, are 3 Inca child mummies discovered on the 16th of March 1999 by Jonathan Reinhard and his archaeological team near the summit of Lulalako at 673 meters, 22,100 feet for those of us in freedom units, stratovolcano on the Argentina-Chile border. The children were sacrificed in an Inca religious ritual that took place around the year 1500. In this ritual, the 3 children were drugged, then placed inside a small chamber 1.5 meters or 4.9 feet beneath the ground, where they were then left to die. According to Reinhardt, the mummies appear to be the best preserved Inca mummies that have ever been found, and other archaeologists have expressed the same opinion, calling them among the best preserved in the world. On June 20th, 2001, Argentina's National Commission of Museums, Monuments, and Historic Places declared the children of Lulilaico to be a historic property of Argentina. And since 2007, the mummies have been on exhibition in the Museum of the High Altitude Archaeology in the Argentine city of Salta. The Inca Empire was the largest empire in the pre-Columbian America, and possibly the largest empire in the world during the 16th century. The empire arose in the area around the city of Cusco, not the Disney's Emperor's New Groove Cusco, the city, high in the Andes Mountains in modern-day Peru in the 13th century. The Inca civilization did not expand much geographically until the mid-15th century, however. Starting under the rule of Pachacuti in 1438, the Incas swept throughout South America along the Andes Mountains, conquering local peoples along the way and consolidating a massive land empire within the span of less than a century. The Inca Empire reached its maximum geographical extent around 1530 and then began a rapid decline, culminating with the fall of Cusco in 1533, along with the execution of the Emperor Atahualpa, conquered by Spaniards. Child sacrifice, sometimes referred to as capucha or quihapucha, was an important part of the Inca religion and was often used to commemorate important events, such as the death of Sapa Inca. Human sacrifice was also used as an offering to the gods in times of famine because what way to get bread by killing your child? As a way of asking for protection, too, because what better way to ask for protection than, killing your child? Sacrifice could only occur within the direct approval of the Inca emperor. Children were chosen from all over the sprawling Inca Empire and were picked primarily based on their physical perfection. Children chosen for sacrifice were generally sons and daughters of nobles and local rulers. They were then taken hundreds and thousands of miles to Cusco, the capital, where they were subject to the important purification rituals. From there, the children were sent to high mountaintops throughout the empire to be sacrificed. According to traditional Inca belief, children who are sacrificed do not truly die, but instead watch over the land from their mountaintop perches alongside their ancestor. The Inca considered it a great honor to be a sacrifice, whereas we consider it pretty fucking horrifying. Lulilaico, specifically at this burial site, is a stratovolcano 22,110 feet in the air, above sea level, that is. It sits in the Andes Mountains on the modern border separating Chile and Argentina. The burial site was covered by 5 feet of earth and rock at the time of discovery, and the site where the mummies were found has been described as the world's highest archaeological site. Lulilaico is in the Atacama Desert, the driest non-polar desert on Earth. The extreme dryness of the air is a reason for the excellent preservation of the mummies for 500 years, because much in the way that water creates life and everything that it can do, it also corrupts and destroys everything. Shit's dangerous. Dryness and cold temperatures are both known to reduce significantly the decomposition rate of human remains, and the extreme environmental conditions at the summit of Lulilaico are therefore very conducive to preservation. Now, in 1999, when this site was rediscovered, Johann Reinhard and his team of researchers set out into the high Andes to search for Inca ritual sacrifice sites. 3 days into the search, Reinhard's team discovered a gravesite containing 3 mummified children, 2 girls and 1 boy. Several gold, shell, and silver statues, textiles, and pottery was also found. The younger girl's body had been struck by lightning after her death, causing burn damage on her body, especially her face and shoulder, but the other 2 mummies were not affected. Statues made of precious metals and textiles were among the many goods found in the graves. Several times the expedition came close to failure, and after a long acclimation process, including a month spent exploring a lower elevation mountain nearby, the team finally summited Lulilaico after establishing a series of camps throughout the ascent. Throughout this expedition, the researchers braved severe winds of more than 70 miles per hour and extreme temperatures, at one point dropping to negative 40 Celsius, which for our friends in freedom units is negative 40 Fahrenheit, because at negative 40, both temperature systems stop arguing and agree shit's cold. At their final camp of an elevation of 6,600 meters, 21,700 feet, a storm broke out and lasted for 4 days. According to Reinhardt, the team was about to get up when they spotted an artificial layer in the site that indicated they should continue the investigation. Researchers followed the artificial layer, which eventually led them to the burial of one of the mummies. The mummies themselves were numbering in 3. 3 of these mummies were found at the Lululiko site: the maiden, the lightning girl, and the boy. Once at the top of the mountain, they had not been allowed to fall asleep, and then placed in a small tomb underground where they were left to die. In addition, they had been fed a high-protein diet before being sacrificed, because you gotta have those kids ready to get gains before you send them to meet the gods. The mummies were in exceptional condition when found, and it's been said like 4 times in this goddamn article, they are the best preserved mummies to have ever been found. We know. The oldest mummy, a girl found to be around the age of 15, dubbed La Doncella, had become widely known as the Maiden of Lululiko. A bacterial infection was discovered in her lungs during an examination, and she wore a dress with her hair elaborately braided, along with a feather-adorned headdress. It is believed that La Doncella was an Akla, or Sun Virgin. She was a virgin chosen and sanctified at around the age of 10 years to live with other girls and women who would become royal wives, priestesses, and sacrifices. She really got the shit end of that deal. The practice of ritual sacrifice in Inca society was intended to ensure health, rich harvests, and favorable weather. La Niña del Rayo. La Niña del Rayo was approximately 60 years old when she was sacrificed. Her face, one of her ears, and part of her shoulder were damaged by a lightning strike that occurred after her death. Her head was lifted high and she was facing southwest. She was wearing a traditional light brown ascu dress along with a part of her body being wrapped in a thick woolen blanket. In addition, her entire body was wrapped in another blanket, this one embroidered in red and yellow. Her skull appears to have been intentionally elongated. La Niña del Rayo appears to have been treated less roughly than El Niño, but without the care which La Doncella was treated. The body of El Niño, who was about 7 years old when he was sacrificed, had been tightly wrapped, since some of his ribs and pelvis were dislocated. He apparently died under stress, since vomit and blood were found on his clothing. There also appeared to be an infestation of nits in his hair, meaning he had lice. He was the only child to be tied up, lying in the fetal position. He was wearing a gray tunic, a silver bracelet, and leather shoes that had been wrapped in a red and brown blanket. The skull of El Niño had been slightly elongated, similar to that of La Niña del Rayo. Owing to the way in which he was tied up, it is believed that he may have died of suffocation. El Niño was found buried with a collection of small objects, some of them depicting finely dressed men driving caravans of llamas. A woolen sling was wrapped around his head, and slings were used by men in a ritual activity to launch stones into the lagoons at the end of the dry season to hasten the coming of rains. According to biochemical analysis of La Doncella's hair, the children had been drugged with alcohol and cocoa before the start of the sacrificial ritual. La Doncella had been drugged by cocoa leaves and maize beer known as chicha. Though all 3 of the sacrifices had consumed significant amounts of these substances prior to the ritual, a hair sample analysis shows that La Doncella had consumed significantly more cocoa and alcohol than either El Niño or La Niña del Rayo, because she wasn't a fucking lightweight. Her hair contained the highest concentration of cocoa ever found in Andean human remains too, so she really ain't no lightweight. And to this day, the mummies remain on exhibition, which has caused some controversy because why would you take indigenous people's bodies and just fucking portray them in a museum? What the fuck is this? Britain? Come on. Well, here we are, finally getting into the final levels of it. Are the earrape jokes funny yet? Is allowed equal funny? Have I cracked the formula yet? Probably not, but thank you for watching this far, so, let's just dive right on in. Crash at crush, more like crashing into my crush going 75 miles an hour on the freeway. The crash at crush was a one-day publicity stunt in the United States state of Texas that took place on September 15th, 1896. Really whipping out the dinosaur shit here. This crash involved 2 unmanned locomotives, and they were crashed into each other head-on at high speed. William George Crush, General Passenger Agent of the Missouri, Kansas, Texas Railroad, conceived the idea in order to demonstrate a staged train wreck as a public spectacle. No admission was charged, and train fares to the crash site called Crush set up as a temporary destination for the event, were offered at a reduced rate of US $2, equivalent to $62 in 2020, from any location in Texas. As a result, an estimated 40,000 people, more people than lived in the state's second largest city at the time, attended the event. Unexpectedly, the impact caused both engine boilers to explode, resulting in a shower of flying debris that killed 2 people and caused numerous injuries among spectators. Real nice publicity event, dumbass. In terms of preparations, there wasn't much. The Missouri-Kansas-Texas Railroad, properly known as the Katy from its MKT initials, had reached the crush site area in the 1880s during the construction of a route between Dallas and Houston. As the railroad expanded, the Katy replaced its 30-ton steam engines with newer, more powerful 60-ton engines, and subsequently a stockpile of the older units for which the railroad now had no use began to accumulate. In 1896, Katy agent William Crush proposed a publicity stunt that could make use of the obsolete Katy trains, and it was to be held along the Dallas-Houston route at a site 14 miles north of Waco. Oh boy, that's a bad spot to talk about. And 3 miles south of the town West. A locomotive crash staged by the Columbus and Hocking Valley Railroad at Buckeye Park near Lancaster, Ohio on May 30th, 1896 had been a massive success. Buckeye Park was established and owned by the rail yard to entice residents of nearby Columbus to take weekend excursions. The locomotive crash was planned for the park's annual opening day and drew approximately 20,000 spectators. While no admission was charged, money was made on the railroad passenger traffic to and from the park. Crush imagined a similar spectacle for which Katy could advertise to all of Texas. Crush's superiors thought, "This is a great idea!" and agreed to his proposal to put him in charge of the project. The railroad decided the event would be free of charge, instead profiting from the sale of tickets on a special excursion, trains that would run to and from the site. The price was US $2, equivalent to $62.22 in 2020, per round-trip ticket from anywhere in the state. 2 water wells were drilled at the site, and a circus tent from Ringling Brothers was erected. Just like I was. As well as a grandstand, 3 speakers, stands, a platform for reporters, 2 telegraph offices, and a special train depot over which a giant sign proclaimed the new town as Crush, Texas. Events from the Midway Plains, including lemonade stands, carnival games, medicine shows, cigar vendors, and other sideshows, were highly anticipated, with construction foremen saying this feature alone will be worth going to Crush to see. A separate 4-mile segment of track was built for the event alongside the Katy Railroad, so that there was no chance a runaway train could end up on the main line. Each end of the track was situated atop a low hill opposite sides of a bowl-shaped valley in which the trains would meet. The locomotives to be used were 2 35-ton, decommissioned Baldwin engines, number 999 and number 1001. In terms of safety precautions, there was none. On the day before the exhibition, railroad officials staged a speed test of the engines to help predict the precise point of collision. Katy engineers assured Crush that his grand idea was safe. Spoiler alert, it wasn't! Specifically, that the boilers on the steam engines had been designed to resist ruptures. They weren't! And that even in a very high-speed crash, they were unlikely to explode. Wrong! Each engine would pull 6 boxcars behind it because the couplers used to link the cars were considered unreliable. The cars were chained together to prevent them from coming apart during the impact. Oh, something came apart during that impact, all right! Crush insisted on restricting the general public to a minimum of 200 yards away from the track. This was a good idea, but not good enough! And allowed members of the press to be within 100 yards. Bad idea! Katy officials expected a crowd between 20,000 and 25,000 people to attend, but the clever marketing ploy was an overwhelming success, and the railroad sold out more than 30 special excursion trains to the event. The crash itself was delayed for an hour because a crowd resisted being pressed back by the police to what was supposedly a safe distance. Emphasis on supposedly. At about 5 p.m., the two trains pulling cars loaded with railroad ties slowly met in the middle of the track to be photographed. They were then rolled to their starting points at opposite ends of the track. Crush, riding a white Charger, signaled the start of the main event. The new engineers and crew aboard each train opened the steam to a prearranged setting, rode for exactly 4 turns of the drive wheels, and then jumped from the trains. The September 16th issue of the Dallas Morning News described what happened next. The rumble of the two trains, faint and far off at first, but growing nearer and more distinct with each fleeting second, was like the gathering force of a cyclone. Nearer and nearer they came, the whistles of each blowing repeatedly, the torpedoes which had been placed on the track exploding in an almost continuous round, like the rattle of musketry. They rolled down at a frightful rate of speed, within a quarter of a mile of each other. Nearer and nearer they approached the fatal meeting place, and the rumbling increased, the roaring grew louder. Each train reached a speed of about 45 miles per hour, and by the time they met their near-anticipated spot, though some observers believed they were traveling much faster. Shortly after, the trains collided, and there was a large explosion. A crash, a sound of timbers rent and torn, and then a shower of splinters. There was just a swift instance of silence, and then, as if controlled by a single impulse, both boilers exploded simultaneously. The air was filled with flying missiles of iron and steel, varying in different size, from a postage stamp to half of a driving wheel. Debris was blown hundreds of feet into the air. Panic broke quickly as the crowd turned and ran. Some of the debris came down upon the crowd, killing 2 and seriously injuring 6 others. A photographer, Jarvis Joe Dean of Waco, lost one eye to a flying bolt. The locomotives and their boxcars were reduced to mere scraps. Now, after the incident, of course, all that remained of the 2 engines and 12 cars was a smoking mass of fractured metal and kindling wood, except for 1 car on each rear of the trains, which had been left untouched, which is impressive. The engines had both been completely telescoped, and contrary to experience in such cases, instead of rising from the air with the force of the blow, they were just flattened out. And there was nothing about the cars big enough, save except the pieces of wood, which were eagerly seized upon and carried home as souvenirs. The story, of course, made national headlines. This is 1896. We're playing baseball for fun. How fucking bored do you think America was? Spoiler alert, really bored. And Crush was immediately fired from Katy Railroad because, hey, we approved it, but it was your idea. In a light and lack of negative publicity, however, he was rehired the next day and continued to work for the company until his retirement. So he got that ye old police officer treatment, and his career spanned 6 decades in total. Katy Railroad quickly settled several lawsuits from the victims' families with cash and lifetime rail passes. The injured photographer received damages amounting to US $10,000, equivalent to $311,000 in 2020. Though the incident had resulted in tragedy, the Katy benefited enormously from the attention it received, including international recognition. Ain't no such thing as bad press, baby. Despite the disaster, many railroads considered and continued to stage locomotive collisions in the following years because we ain't learned shit, boy! Let's blow up those fucking trains! Whoop! Ming of Harlem. Does that sound like a human name? Well, you'd be dead wrong. Ming was a tiger that became notable when he was found living in an apartment in Harlem, New York City, United States, obviously, in October 2003. Wow, a lot of shit happened in the year that I was born. Probably because I was born. Ming was approximately 3 years old at the time of his capture, lived semi-openly with his owner, Antoine Yates, in a room of his 5-bedroom apartment on the 5th floor of a large public housing complex in Harlem. Several other normal and exotic pets were found in Yates' apartment, including an alligator named Al in another bedroom. Could you imagine just going into a dude's house and he's like, stay out of the tiger's room and the alligator's room. Now, Ming, of course, was seized and spent the rest of his life at Noah's Lost Ark Animal Sanctuary in Berlin Center, Ohio. And Ming died from natural causes in February 2019 and was buried at the Hartsdale Pet Cemetery in Hartsdale, New York. Getting into the history of the matter, in April 2000, Antoine Yates, a 31-year-old part-time taxicab driver and resident of Harlem, New York City, purchased Ming, an 8-week-old male Siberian Bengal tiger hybrid, from the Bearcat Hollow Animal Park in Racine, Minnesota. Records indicated that the Bearcat Hollow had previously sold a lion cub to Yates, but he had found another home for the lion shortly after purchasing Ming. Ming's existence became known and reported in the media after Yates went to the Harlem Hospital Center emergency room on September 30th, 2003, with bites on the arm and leg. At the time of treatment, Yates claimed his pet pit bull had bitten him. However, the medical personnel were suspicious because the width of the bite marks suggested an animal with a much larger jaw. And indeed it was. Later, Yates said he had been bitten while trying to keep Ming away from Shadow, a cat he had recently adopted, because that's a smart idea. When you have a big-ass apex predator living in your house, adopt a small animal it'd like to eat. Now, of course, Yates checked out of the hospital on October 3rd, and the same day, following up on a tip, an officer of the New York City Police Department was sent to his home to address and investigate the problem. The problem being loud growling noises that could be heard through the door of the apartment, causing the officer to avoid entering. The NYPD Technical Assistance Response Unit drilled holes through the neighbor's walls and used a camera on a pole to locate Ming. Martin Duffy, another police officer, was sent to the roof, from which he abseiled on a rope sling to view through the apartment's windows. Ming roared at Duffy, who was then anesthetized Ming by firing a rifle with a tranquilizer dart, and of course, this was prepared by the city's chief veterinarian, Dr. Robert Cook. After being darted, Ming charged at the window from which Duffy had fired, breaking it. It then retreated further into the apartment. Authorities waited several minutes for the sedative to take effect before an animal control team was sent to Yates' apartment. Dr. Cook used a catch pole and gave Ming another sedative injection to ensure he would remain asleep during the transport, and it took more than 6 men to carry Ming down via elevator to a waiting truck. The team also discovered Al, a 5.5-foot alligator that Yates had been raising in one of the bedrooms. Yates was later located at a hospital in Philadelphia and placed under guard. After Ming was discovered in Yates' apartment in October 2003, questioning of the neighbors determined the existence of the tiger was widely known for at least 3 years, but as sort of an urban legend. One fact that turned up was that Yates regularly bought large quantities of raw chicken at the local supermarket, and it was a standing joke in the building that he could eat so much chicken every day. But by 2003, Yates was feeding Ming 20 pounds of chicken, livers, and bones per day. In addition, Yates had taken roommates who were unaware of the animals in the home, according to the New York Daily News. A woman who shared a Harlem apartment with the 425-pound tiger said yesterday that she was terrified at first, but soon got used to living with the man-eater down the hall. Carolyn Domingo told Daily News she couldn't believe her eyes when she spotted a big cat roaming free in the apartment where she and her husband rented a room from tiger owner Antoine Yates. But eventually, she said, we all became family. How happy. Yates was arrested on charges of reckless endangerment and possession of a wild animal, and later his mother was charged with endangering the welfare as a child since she had been babysitting children in the apartment. As part of a plea agreement to reduce charges against his mother, Yates pleaded guilty to reckless endangerment and eventually served a 5-month prison term with 5 years probation. He was released after serving 3 months, and subsequently he sued New York City for the loss of his pets, including a rabbit, and for $7,000 cash, which he claimed had also been in the apartment. A judge dismissed the case, calling him, that son of a bitch's full of chutzpah. Authorities decided to move the seized animals to a more appropriate housing. Somewhere meant to take care of a fucking tiger. Ming was sent to Noah's Lost Ark Animal Sanctuary in Berlin Center, Ohio, while Al was given a new home in Indiana. Otherwise, Al was sent to hell. Indiana's literally hell. Around 2010, Yates lived in Pahrump, Nevada, near Las Vegas. Hey, that's where my great-grandparents live. With 22 big cats, including 4 tigers, having redubbed himself Antoine Tigerman Yates. He established the Reach Out and Respond Foundation in 2011, and a 2018 article in the New York Post cast doubts on Yates' veracity, noting that a licensed tiger owner in Pahrump stated that Yates had never lived in Nevada. Now, this is very interesting because while I'm not going to dox myself, my family does have a great deal of connections and relations to the kinds of wacky-ass animals you can own in Nevada, as well as the mafia. A lot of mob ties here, but racism got me cut out of the mob part of the family. Long story. But there's pictures of my grandfather with tigers, so it is possible. In Nevada, they don't give a shit. Nevada was literally... Utah was like, praise be, we aren't gonna do shit because Jesus Christ. And Nevada said, woo, you wanna fuck bitches and gamble? Go ahead. You want a fucking tiger? Do it. Death of Red Fox. Fox was born John Elroy Sanford on December 9th, 1922 in St. Louis, Missouri, and raised in Chicago's South Side. His father, Fred Sanford, was an electrician and auto mechanic from Hickman, Kentucky, and when he left the family when Fox was 4 years old, leaving him to be raised by his half-Seminole mother, Mary Hughes from Ellisville. But of course, this is about the death, so now that you know a little bit about Red Fox, let's get a little bit further. Red Fox, of course, was the pseudonym he used during his widely and wildly successful comedy tours and acts. That was Red Fox's claim to fame, as well as his income. Of course, Red Fox wed 4 times. His first marriage was to Evelyn Killebrew in 1948 and ended in divorce in 1951. Fun fact, in the 50s, divorce was referred to as going to Reno because Reno, Nevada would let you get divorced with no questions asked. On July 5th, 1956, Fox married Betty Jean Harris, a showgirl and dancer. I'm sure that ended well. Oh, wait, it didn't. Now, of course, the couple separated in 1974 due to Fox's infidelity after 18 years of marriage, and Fox filed for the divorce on the grounds of incompatibility in May 1974. Fox married his third wife, Joy Yun Chi Chung. Wow. That's an interesting name. At the Thunderbird Hotel in Las Vegas, December 31st, 1976. I'm sure he wasn't high on cocaine when he did that. Really sure. In July 1991, Fox went on to wed Kahao Chow from Seoul, South Korea. They met at Bali's Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas, and despite denouncing marriage after his third divorce, Fox told Jet magazine that he married Chow because she stuck by him through his trials and tribulations with the IRS. Interesting fellow, methinks. What beef do you have with the IRS, my good friend? Better yet, how do I do it? Now, of course, you don't want to hear about this guy's love life, you want to hear about his death, so let's just get to it. On October 11, 1991, during a break from rehearsals from the royal family, Fox suffered a heart attack on set. According to Della Reese, Fox was chatting with a reporter from Entertainment Tonight. The scene he was supposed to be in was not ready to shoot, and Fox and Reese were practicing. In fact, Fox had no lines in the scene at all. As Reese said, all he had to do was walk behind the back of my chair. While Fox was giving the interview, one of the producers entered the stage and asked where he was. Reese told him, and the producer responded by grabbing Fox and taking him to set, saying if he's supposed to be in the scene, he should be here. Reese said that this was another in the long line of disputes Fox had with the producers, including an instance where one claimed he could teach Fox to be funny. Because, yeah, that's right, you, a measly television producer who no one knows the name of, could certainly teach a very famous comedian to be funny, because you do it so much better. Fox, irate, did his scripted pass. However, he fell to the floor immediately after doing so, probably from the sheer cringe factor of the assholes he was working with. Reese said that nobody initially suspected anything wrong. Fox was, after all, famous for having Fred Sanford fake heart attacks on Sanford & Son, and was particularly skilled at pratfalls. Except, uh-oh, somebody's not faking this time. When Fox did not immediately rise and heard him say, "Get my wife," twice, Reese called for paramedics, who initially pronounced Fox dead at the scene. According to Joshua Rich at Entertainment Weekly, it was an end so ironic that for a brief moment, castmates figured Fox, whose 1970s TV character often faked cornies, was kidding when he grabbed a chair and fell to the floor. Talk about boy who called wolf. Fox was temporarily resuscitated and taken to the Queen of Angels Hollywood Presbyterian Medical Center. 4.5 hours after admission, he was again pronounced dead. Fox was then buried at Palm Memorial Park, also known as Palm Eastern Cemetery in Las Vegas. Fox's mother, Mary Sanford Carson, 1903 to 1993, outlived her son by 2 years. She had been lingering in and out of coma for a few years before her death in 1993, and she's buried behind him. He does, of course, have a lot of influence, even though a lot of us have never heard his name, because that's the weird way that the world works. The actions of someone centuries or decades ago affects your life directly now. But that is Red Fox's death. So on to the next one, Hiro Onada. Hiro Onada was born the 19th of March in 1922 in Kamikawa Village in the Kaiso district of Wakayama Prefecture, Japan. When he was 17 years old, he went to work for the Tajima Yoko Trading Company in Wuhan, China. And when he was 18, he enlisted in the Imperial Japanese Army Infantry. Onada trained as an intelligence officer in the commando class Futamata of the Nakano School. On the 26th of December 1944, he was sent to Lubang Island in the Philippines. He was ordered to do all he could to hamper enemy attacks on the island, including destroying the airstrip and the pier at the harbor. Onada's orders also stated that under no circumstances was he to surrender or to take his own life. When he landed on the island, Onada joined forces with a group of Japanese soldiers who had been sent there previously. The officers in the group outranked Onada and prevented him from carrying out his assignment, which made it far easier for the United States and Philippine Commonwealth forces to take the island when they landed the 28th of February 1945. Within a short time of landing, all but Onada and 3 other soldiers had died or surrendered. Onada, who had been promoted to lieutenant after this, ordered the men to take to the hills. Onada continued his campaign as a Japanese holdout, initially living in the mountains of Lubang Island in the Philippines, with 3 fellow soldiers, Private Yuichiro Akatsu, Corporal Shoichi Shimada, and Private First Class Kinshiki Kozuka. During his stay, Onada and his companions carried out guerrilla activities and engaged in several shootouts with local police. The first time they saw a leaflet announcing that Japan had surrendered was in October of 1945. Another Selic killed a cow and found a leaflet left behind by islanders which read, "The war ended 15th of August. Come down from the mountains." They, however, distrusted the leaflet. They concluded it was Allied propaganda, and also believed that they would not have been fired on if the war was indeed over. Towards the end of 1945, leaflets were dropped by air with the surrender order printed on them from General Tomoyuki Yamashita of the 14th Area Army. To the men who had been hiding for over 6 months, this leaflet was the only evidence they had that the war was over. But Onada's group studied the leaflet closely to determine whether it was genuine, and they decided it wasn't. One of the 4 soldiers, Yuichi Akatsuki, walked away from the others in September 1949 and surrendered to Philippine forces March 1950, after 6 months on his own. This seemed like a security problem to the others, and they became even more cautious. In 1952, letters and family pictures were dropped from an aircraft urging them to surrender, but the 3 soldiers concluded this was a trick. Shimada was shot in the leg during a shootout with local fishermen in June 1953, after which Onada nursed him back to health, but on May 7, 1954, Shimada would be killed by a shot fired by a search party looking for the men. Kozuka was killed by 2 shots fired by local police on the 19th of October 1972, while he and Onada, as part of their guerrilla activities, were burning rice that had been collected by farmers. Onada was now alone. On the 20th of February 1974, though, Onada met a Japanese man, Norio Suzuki, who was traveling around the world looking for Lieutenant Onada, a panda, and the abominable snowman, in that order. Suzuki found Onada after 4 days of searching, and Onada described this moment in a 2010 interview. He says, and I quote, "This hippie boy Suzuki came to the island to listen to the feelings of a Japanese soldier. Suzuki asked me why I would not come out. Onada and Suzuki quickly became friends, but Onada still refused to surrender, saying that he was waiting on orders from a superior officer. Suzuki returned to Japan with photographs of himself and Onada as proof of their encounter, and the Japanese government located Onada's commanding officer, Major Yoshimi Taniguchi, who had long surrendered and since become a bookseller. Taniguchi went to Lubang Island, and on the 9th of March 1974, he finally met with Onada and fulfilled a promise he had made back in 1944. Whatever happens, we'll come back for you. Taniguchi then issued Onada the following orders. In accordance with the Imperial Command, the 14th Area Army has ceased all combat activity. In accordance with the Military Headquarters Command Number A-2003, the Special Squadron of Staff's Headquarters is relieved of all military duties. Units and individuals under the command of the Special Squadron are to cease military activities and operations immediately and place themselves under the command of the nearest superior officer. When no officer can be found, they are to communicate with American or Philippine forces and follow their directives. Onada was thus relieved of duty, and he surrendered. He turned over a sword, a functioning Arisaka Type 99 rifle, 500 rounds of ammunition, and several hand grenades, as well as a dagger his mother had given him in 1944 to kill himself with if he was captured. Only Private Tiro Nakamura, arrested on the 18th of December 1974 in Indonesia, held out longer than Mr. Hiro Onada. His later life, though, was, well, troubling. Onada was very popular following his return to Japan, and some people even encouraged him to run for the Diet, Japan's bicameral legislature. He released an autobiography shortly after his return, detailing his life as a guerrilla fighter in the war that conveniently left out the part where he killed 30 people. Of course, governments weren't too happy about that, specifically the Philippine governments, and Onada found himself troubled by the sudden fame that he had. He didn't like it. Japan and its government offered him a large sum of money in back pay, and he refused. When the money was pressed on him by well-wishers, he donated it to Yasukuni Shrine. Onada was, again, very unhappy with receiving much of the attention and troubled by what he saw as a withering of traditional Japanese values, and in 1975, he followed the example of his elder brother and left Japan for Brazil, where he raised cattle. He married in 1976 and assumed a role in the Colonia Gemic colony, a Japanese community in Ternos, Mato Grosso do Sul, Brazil. Onada also allowed Brazilian Air Force to conduct training sessions on the land that he owned. After reading about a Japanese teenager who had murdered his parents in 1980, Onada returned to Japan in 1984, literally 1984, and established the Onada Shikinjuku, Onada Nature School. This was an educational camp for young people, held at various locations in Japan. Although Hiro Onada never apologized or expressed any remorse for casually killing 30 Filipino civilians, mostly farmers, stealing their foods and burning their crops, then-President Ferdinand Marcos granted him full pardon in a televised ceremony. As a result, controversy followed when Onada revisited Lubang Island in 1996, because his wife, Machi Onada, had arranged a $10,000 scholarship donation on his behalf to a local school there. In 2006, Machi Onada became the head of a right-wing conservative Japan's Woman Association, established by the far-right group Nippon Kaigi in September 2001. Certainly troublesome. Now, for many years, Onada spent 3 months of the year in Brazil, and Onada was awarded with the Merit Medal of Santos Dumont by the Brazilian Air Force on the 6th of December 2004. And on the 21st of February 2010, the Legislative Assembly of Mato Grosso do Sul awarded him the title of citizen. Onada's life after the war, of course, couldn't last forever. No human lives forever, right? And Onada died of heart failure on the 16th of January 2014. The disappearance of Frederick Valentich. I guess I just can't fucking escape true crime, can I? God damn it! Frederick Valentich was an Australian pilot who, while on a 125 nautical mile training flight in a Cessna 182L light aircraft registered VHDSJ over Bass Strait on the evening of the 21st of October 1978, described as a flying saucer enthusiast, 20-year-old Valentich informed Melbourne Air Traffic that he was being accompanied by an aircraft about 1,000 feet 300 meters above him, that his engine had begun running roughly. before finally reporting it's not an aircraft. I think you know what happens here. Frederick Valentich is never seen again, and UFO reporters go absolutely fucking nutty because holy shit, the lizards cummed in his ass and then took him to a different planet. Now, of course, Frederick Valentich, born June 1958 and completely disappeared October 21st, 1978, had about 150 total hours flying time and held Class 4 instrument rating, which authorized him to fly at night, but only in visual meteorological conditions. He twice applied to enlist in the RAAF, my apologies, but was rejected because of inadequate educational qualifications. He was a member of the RAAF training corps and determined to have a career in aviation. Valentich was studying part-time to become a commercial pilot, but had poor achievement record, having twice failed all 5 commercial license examination subjects, and as recently as a month before his disappearance had failed 3 more commercial license subjects. He'd also been involved in flying incidents, for example, straying into a controlled zone in Sydney, for which he received a warning, and twice deliberately flying into a cloud, for which prosecution was being considered. According to his father Guido, Valentich was an ardent believer in UFOs and had been worried about being attacked by them. The destination of Valentich's final flight was King Island, but his motivation for the flight was unknown. He told flight officials he was going to King Island to pick up some friends, while others told him and he told others that he was going to pick up crayfish. Later investigations found both stated reasons to be untrue, and Valentich had also failed to inform the King Island airport of his intention to land there, going against standard procedure. Now, of course, Valentich radioed Melbourne air traffic at 7:06 p.m. to report that an unidentified aircraft was following him at 45,000 feet. He was told there was no known traffic at that level, and Valentich said he could see a large unknown aircraft, which appeared to be illuminated by 4 bright landing lights. He was unable to confirm its type, but said it had passed about 1,000 feet overhead and was moving at a high speed. Valentich then reported that the aircraft was approaching him east, and the other pilot might be purposefully toying with him. Valentich said the aircraft was orbiting above him, that it had a shiny metal surface and a green light on it. Valentich further reported that he was experiencing engine problems. Asked to identify the aircraft, Valentich chillingly radioed one last time, "It's not an aircraft." His transmission was then interrupted by unidentified noises described as being metallic scraping sounds before all contact was lost. Then Valentich himself was lost. A sea and air search was undertaken that included ocean-going traffic and an RAAF Lockheed P-3 Orion aircraft plus 8 civilian aircraft. The search encompassed over 1,000 square miles, and search efforts ceased on the 25th of October 1978 without a result. An investigation into Valentich's disappearance by the Australian Department of Transport was unable to determine the cause, but it was presumed fatal for Valentich. 5 years after Valentich's aircraft went missing, an engine cowl flap was found washed ashore on Flinders Island. In July of 1983, the Bureau of Air Safety Investigation asked the Royal Australian Navy Research Laboratory about the likelihood that the cowl flap might have traveled to its ultimate position from the region the aircraft disappeared. The Bureau noted that the part has been identified as coming from a Cessna 182 aircraft between certain range of serial numbers, which included Valentich's aircraft, but this still leaves the entire thing unexplained. As for explanations, it's proposed that Valentich staged his own experience, even taking into account a trip between 30 and 45 minutes to Cape Otway. The single-engine Cessna 182 still had enough fuel to fly 500 miles despite ideal conditions, and at no time was the aircraft plotted on radar, casting doubts to whether it was ever near Cape Otway. And Melbourne police received reports of light aircraft making a mysterious landing not far from Cape Otway at the same time as Valentich's disappearance. Another proposed explanation is that Valentich became disoriented and was flying upside down. If this were the case, the lights he saw would likely be his own aircraft's lights reflected in the water, which he then would have crashed into. However, the model Cessna he was piloting could not have flown inverted for long, as it has a gravity-fueled system, meaning the engine would have cut out very quickly. Yet another proposed possibility is suicide. However, interviews with doctors and colleagues who knew him virtually eliminated this possibility. A 2013 review of the radio transcripts by data by astronomer and retired United Air Force pilot, States Air Force pilot. Wow, it's been a long night, okay. James McGaha and author Joe Nickel proposes that the inexperienced Valentich was deceived by the illusion of a tilted horizon for which he attempted to compensate and immediately put his aircraft into a downward so-called graveyard spiral, which he initially mistook for simple orbiting of the aircraft. According to authors, the g-forces of a tightening spiral would decrease fuel flow, resulting in the rough idling reported by Valentich. McGaha and Nickel also proposed that the apparently stationary overhead lights Valentich reported were probably the planets Venus, Mars, and Mercury, along with the bright star Antares, which would have behaved in a way consistent with Valentich's descriptions. But there's, of course, ufologists who are like, holy shit, the little green men put cum in his asshole! Hamida Dijandubi. Born in Tunisia on the 22nd of September 1949, Dijandubi started living in Marseille in 1968, working at a grocery store. He later worked as a landscaper, but had a workplace accident in 1971 when his legs got caught in the tracks of a tractor and resulted in the loss of 2/3 of his right leg. In 1973, a 21-year-old woman named Elizabeth Bosquet, with whom Dijandubi had met in the hospital while recovering from his amputation, filed a complaint against him, stating that he had tried to force her into prostitution. After his arrest and eventual release from custody during the spring of 1973, Dijandubi drew 2 other young girls into his confidence and then forced them into prostitution for him, and on July 3rd, 1974, he kidnapped Bosquet and took her into his home where, in full view of the terrified girls, he beat the woman before stubbing a lit cigarette all over her breasts and genital area. Bosquet survived the ordeal, so he took her by car to the outskirts of Marseille and strangled her there. Upon his return, Dijandubi warned the 2 girls to say nothing of what they had seen, and Bosquet's body was discovered in a shed by a boy on the 7th of July, 1974. 1 month later, Dijandubi kidnapped another girl who managed to escape and report him to police. After a lengthy pre-trial process, Dijandubi was eventually appearing in court in Aix-en Province on charges of torture, murder, rape, and premeditated violence on the 24th of February 1977. His main defense revolved around the supposed effects of the amputation of his leg 6 years earlier, in which his lawyer claimed had driven him to a paroxysm of alcohol abuse violence and turning him into a different man. Really not a solid defense there. On the 25th of February, he was sentenced to death. An appeal against his sentence was rejected on the 9th of June, and in the early morning of the 10th of September 1977, 12 days before his 28th birthday, Dijandubi was informed that he, like the child murderers Christian Ranucci, executed 28th of July 1976, and Jerome Curin, executed on the 23rd of June 1977, had not received a reprieve from President Valéry Giscard d'Estaing. Shortly afterwards, at 4:40 a.m., he was executed by guillotine at Baumetzes prison in Marseille. While Dijandubi was the last person executed in France, he was not the last condemned. No more executions occurred after capital punishment was abolished in France in 1981 following the elections of François Mitterrand, and those sentenced to die had their sentences commuted. Dijandubi's death was the last time any Western nation carried out an execution by beheading, as well as the most recent government-sanctioned guillotine execution in the world. But in my personal opinion, we do need to bring the guillotines back and kill a very select few group of peoples. Well, here we are, the very last level of the bizarre Wikipedia articles iceberg. I hope you're prepared, because I am. Buckle your fuckles, let's get right into it. Death of Gloria Ramirez. Gloria Ramirez, born January 11th, 1963 and died February 19th, 1994, was a woman from Riverside, California who was dubbed the Toxic Lady or the Toxic Woman. Interestingly enough, the same nickname that my ex-girlfriends have. by the media when several hospital workers became ill after exposure to her body and blood. She had been admitted to the emergency department while suffering from late-stage cervical cancer, and while treating Ramirez, several hospital workers fainted and others experienced symptoms such as shortness of breath and muscle spasms. 5 workers required hospitalization, one of whom remained in an ICU for 2 weeks. Now, to start this incident off, at about 8:15 p.m. on the evening of February 19, 1994, Ramirez, suffering from severe heart palpitations, was brought into the emergency department of Riverside General Hospital in Moreno Valley, California by paramedics. She was extremely confused and suffering from tachycardia and Cheyenne-Stokes respiration. The medical staff injected her with diazepam, midazolam, and lorazepam to sedate her. When it became clear that Ramirez was responding poorly to treatment, the staff tried to defibrillate her heart, and at that point several people saw an oily sheen covering Ramirez's body. Some noticed a strangely fruity, garlic-like odor that they thought was coming from her mouth. Registered nurse Susan Kane attempted to draw blood from Ramirez's arm and noticed an ammonia-like smell coming from the tube. She passed the syringe to Julie Georgiansky, a medical resident who noticed some manila-colored particles floating in her blood. At this point, Kane fainted and was removed from the room, and shortly thereafter, Georgiansky began to feel nauseated, complaining that she was lightheaded. She left the trauma room and sat at a nurse's desk. A staff member asked her if she was okay, but before she could respond, she also fainted. Maureen Welch, a respiratory therapist who was assisting the trauma room, was the third to pass out. The staff was then ordered to evacuate all emergency department patients to the parking lot outside the hospital. Overall, 23 people became ill and 5 were hospitalized, and a skeleton crew stayed behind to stabilize Ramirez. At 8:50 p.m., after 45 minutes of CPR and defibrillation, Ramirez was pronounced dead from kidney failure related to her cancer. The County Health Department called in California's Department of Health and Human Services, which put 2 scientists, Drs. Ana Maria Osorio and Kirsten Waller, on the case. They interviewed 34 hospital staff who had been working in the emergency department on February 19th using a standardized questionnaire. And Osorio and Waller found that the people who had developed severe symptoms such as loss of consciousness, shortness of breath, and muscle spasms tended to have certain things in common. People who had worked within 2 feet of Ramirez and handled her intravenous lines had been at high risk, but other factors that correlated with severe symptoms did not appear to match the scenario in which fumes had been released. The survey found that those affected tended to be women rather than men, and they all had normal blood tests after the exposure. They believed the hospital workers suffered from mass hysteria. Gorchinsky denied that she had been affected by mass hysteria and pointed to her own medical history as evidence. After the exposure, she spent 2 weeks in the ICU with breathing problems. She developed hepatitis and avascular necrosis in her knees, and Riverside's coroner office contacted Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory to investigate the incident. Livermore Labs postulated Ramirez had been using dimethyl sulfoxide, a solvent known as a powerful degreaser, as a home remedy for pain. Users of this report that it has a garlic-like taste, solid in gel form, and sold in hardware stores. It could also explain the greasy appearance of Ramirez's body. The Livermore scientists theorized that the DMSO in Ramirez's system might have built up owing to urinary blockage, causing her kidney failure. Oxygen administered by the paramedics would have combined with the DSMO to form dimethylsulfone, which is known to crystallize at room temperature, and crystals were observed in some of Ramirez's drawn blood. Electric shocks being administered during the emergency defibrillation would have then converted the DMSO2 into dimethyl sulfate DMSO4, the highly toxic dimethyl ester of sulfuric acid, exposure to which could have caused some of the reported symptoms of the emergency department staff. The Livermore scientists postulated on the new detectives that the change in temperature of the blood drawn from 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit of Ramirez's body to the 64 degrees Fahrenheit of the emergency department may have contributed to its conversion from DMSO2 into DSMO4. This, however, has not been confirmed. 2 months after Ramirez's death, her body was badly decomposed and it was released for an independent autopsy and burial. The Riverside Coroner's Office hailed Livermore's DMSO conclusion as a probable cause of the hospital worker's symptoms, while her family disagreed. The fuck? The Ramirez's family pathologist was unable to determine a cause of death because her heart was missing, and her other organs were cross-contaminated with fecal matter, and her body was too badly decomposed. And on April 20th, 1994, 10 weeks after her death, Ramirez was buried at Olivewood Memorial Park in Riverside. There are, of course, a few theories about this, which is a status of technical forensic analysis, which postulates the possible chemical explanation for this incident by Patrick M. Grant of the Livermore Forensic Science Center is beginning to appear in basic forensic science textbooks. It involves a DMSO. There is, of course, an alternative theory proposed by the New Times LA, because they're definitely equipped to talk about scientific things, and that was that Gloria Ramirez could have been exposed to precursor chemicals such as methylamine used in the production of methamphetamine. Yes, that's right, she was cooking meth. Riverside County had been reported as one of the largest methamphetamine distribution points in the United States, and as such, she was cooking meth. The theory posits that hospital workers, who were also probably cooking meth, involved in the production of methamphetamine, I fucking knew it, were smuggling precursor chemicals in IV bags because she was cooking meth, and that one could have been mistakenly given to Gloria Ramirez, who was cooking meth. The key element in the support of this theory is that cooking meth. Salish Sea Human Foot Discoveries. Oh boy, is that an interesting name. Since August 20th of 2007, at least 20 detached human feet have been found on the coasts of the Salish Sea in British Columbia, Canada, and Washington, United States. The first discovery on August 20th, 2007 was on Jedediah Island in British Columbia. Feet have been discovered on the coasts of the islands in British Columbia and the U.S. cities of Tacoma and Seattle. In Canada, the BC Coroner's Service said in December 2017 that foul play had been ruled out by authorities in all investigation, and that the feet just came from people who killed in accidents or by suicide, and that feet detached during the normal decomposition process. The feet were usually found in sneakers, which the coroner thought were responsible for keeping the feet buoyant enough to eventually wash ashore, and for giving the feet enough protection from decomposition to be found relatively intact. Prior to the recent seeming rush of feet washing ashore, there have been earlier instances going back more than a century, such as a leg in a boot that was found on a Vancouver beach in 1887. The most recent discovery was on January 1st, 2019, when people on Jetty Island in Everett, Washington, called police to report a boot with a human foot inside, which a coroner was able to match to Antonio Neal, missing since December 12, 2016. Could you imagine having a foot fetish and then finding a dismembered foot? That's the first thing that came to mind when I read this. Now, of course, there is a very long and large list, but it'd just be me reiterating foot on shore. So why do I need to read all of that? The answer, I don't, because it'd be boring as shit. So let's talk about the level of rarity. Decomposition may separate from the foot from the body because the ankle is relatively weak, and buoyancy caused by air either inside or trapped within a shoe will allow that broken off foot to float away. According to Simon Fraser University entomologist Gail Anderson, extremities such as the hands, feet, and head often detach as a body decomposes in water, although they rarely float. You'll float too, Georgie. However, finding feet and not the rest of the bodies has been deemed unusual. Finding 2 feet has been guessed at 1 in a million odds, and thus has been referred to as an anomaly by one police officer. The finding of the 3rd foot made it the first time a police officer interviewed knew about 3 such discoveries had been made so close to each other. Now, of course, there is in popular culture references to it in novels, but I don't really think a lot of my viewer base want to read novels by Norwegian award-winning author Bjørn Lier Horst, as cool as that name sounds. Timom should. Again, following that, even though I spend literal hours talking about true crime in this true crime playlist that I'm not so subtly linking up above, you should go click that if you like true crime. Tamam Shud is a case of a body washing onto a shore. Oh boy, unsolved. The Tamam Shud case, also known as the Mystery Man of Somerton, is an unsolved case of an unidentified man found dead in 1948 on Somerton Park Beach, just south of Adelaide, South Australia, which is also the same place that penguins will prostitute themselves for rocks. Back on track. The case is named after the Persian phrase Tamam Shud, meaning is over or is finished, which was printed on a scrap of paper found months later in the fob pocket of the man's trousers. The scrap had been torn from the final copy of Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, authored by a 12th century poet Omar Khayyam. Tamam was misspelt as Taman in many early reports, and this error has often been repeated, leading to confusion about the name in the media. Now let's just go on ahead and go to the discovery of the body. On December 1st, 1948, at 6:30 a.m., the police were contacted after the body of a man was discovered in Somerton Park Beach near Glenelg, about 11 kilometers southwest of Adelaide, otherwise known as the penguin prostitution capital of the world. The man was found lying in the sand dunes across from the crippled children's home. Interesting. Which was on the corner of the Esplande and the Bickford Terrace. He was lying on his back with his head resting against a seawall and his legs extended and his feet crossed. It was believed that the man had died while sleeping, and an unlit cigarette was on the right collar of his coat. A search for his pockets revealed an unused second-class rail ticket from Adelaide to Henley Beach, a bus ticket from a city that may not have been used, a U.S.-manufactured narrow aluminum comb, a half-empty packet of juicy fruit chewing gum, which doesn't last, that shit sucks, an Army Club cigarette packet, which contained 7 cigarettes of different brands, canisitas, and a quarter-full box of Brian and May matches. Witnesses who came forward said that on the evening of the 30th November, they had seen an individual resembling the dead man lying on his back in the same spot and position near the crippled children's home where the corpse was later found. A couple who saw him around 7 p.m. noted that they saw him extend his right arm to its fullest extent and drop it limply. Another couple from 7:30 p.m. to 8 p.m., during which time the streetlights had come on, recounted that they did not see him move during the half hour in which he was in view, though they did have the impression that his position had changed. Although they commented between themselves that it was odd he was not reacting to the mosquitoes. They thought it had more likely been that he was drunk or asleep and thus did not investigate further, leave the drunk old man alone. Another witness came forward in 1959 and reported to the police that he and 3 others had seen a well-dressed man carrying another man on his shoulders in Somerton Park Beach the night before the body was found, and a police report was made by Detective Don O'Hurdy. According to the pathologist, John Burton Cleland, the man was of Britisher appearance, so bad teeth, likes cheese, and thought to be aged about 40 to 45, and he was in top physical condition, so clearly not British because the Britons are almost as unhealthy as the Americans. At 180 centimeters, 5'11" in freedom units, with gray eyes, fair to ginger-colored hair, slight gray around the temples, with broad shoulders and a narrow waist, hands and nails that showed no signs of manual labor, big and little toes met in a wedge shape, and like those of a dancer or someone who wore boots with pointed toes, pronounced high calf muscles consistent with people who regularly wore boots or shoes with high heels or performed ballet. He was dressed in a white shirt, a red, white, and blue tie,
America.
brown trousers, socks, and shoes, a brown knitted pullover, and a fashionable gray and brown double-breasted jacket of reportedly American tailoring. All labels on the clothes had been removed, however, and he had no hat, unusual for 1948, or wallet, unusual for literally any time period. He was clean-shaven, carried no ID, which led police to believe he committed suicide. Finally, his dental records were not able to be matched to any known person. An autopsy was conducted, and the pathologist estimated the time of death at around 2 a.m. on the 1st of December. His heart was of normal size and normal in every way. Small vessels not commonly observed in the brain were easily discernible with congestion. There was congestion of the pharynx, and the gullet was covered in the whitening of superficial layers of mucosa, with a patch of ulceration in the middle. The stomach was deeply congested, and there was congestion in the second half of the duodenum. There was blood mixed with the food in the stomach. Both kidneys were congested. The liver contained a great excess of blood in its vessels. The spleen was strikingly large, about 3 times the normal size, and there was destruction of the center of liver lobules revealed under the microscope. Acute gastritis, hemorrhage, extensive congestion of the liver and spleen, and congestion to the brain. The autopsy showed that the man's last meal was a pasty eaten 3 to 4 hours before death, but tests failed to reveal any foreign substances in the body. The pathologist concluded that he was quite convinced the death could not have been natural, and the poison that he suggested was a barbiturate or soluble hypnotic. Although poisoning remained a prime suspicion, the pasty was not believed to be the source. Other than that, the coroner was unable to reach a conclusion as to the man's identity, cause of death, or whether the man seen alive at Somerton Beach on the evening of the 30th of November was the same man, as nobody had seen his face at the time. The body was then embalmed on the 10th of December 1948 after the police were unable to get a positive ID, and police said this is the first time they knew that such action was needed. Now, when it comes to the discovery of a suitcase, yes, that's right, there was a suitcase discovered with this man. That is very important to the case. That remains, unsolved, so really important to the case. On the 14th of January 1949, staff at the Adelaide railway station discovered a brown suitcase with its label removed, which had been checked in the station cloakroom after 11 a.m. on the 30th of November 1948. It's believed that the suitcase was owned by a man found on the beach, and in the case was a red checkered dressing gown, a size 7 red felt pair of slippers, 4 pairs of underpants, pajamas, shaving items, a light brown pair of trousers with sand in the cuffs, an electrician screwdriver, a table knife cut down into a sharp instrument, a pair of scissors with sharpened points, a small square of zinc thought to have been used as a protective sheath for the knife and scissors, and a stenciling brush used by third officers on merchant ships for stenciling cargo. Also in the suitcase was a thread card of Babor, a brand orange waxed thread of an unusual type not available in Australia. It was believed that used to repair lining in a pocket of the trousers the dead man was wearing. All identification marks on the clothes have been removed, but police found the name T. Keane on a tie, Keane on a laundry bag, and Keane without the E on a singlet, along with 3 dry cleaning masks. 117 1/7, 4393/7, and 3053/7. Police believed that whoever removed the clothing tags either overlooked these 3 items or purposefully left Keane on the tags and clothes, knowing Keane was not the dead man's name. With wartime rationing still enforced, clothing was difficult to acquire at the time. Although it was a very common practice to use name tags, it was also common when buying second-hand clothing to remove the tags of the previous owners. What was unusual was that there were no spare socks found in the case and no correspondence, although the police found pencils and unused letter stationery. Search concluded that no T. Keane was missing in any English-speaking country, and a nationwide circulation of the dry cleaning marks also proved fruitless. All that could be garnered from the suitcase was at the front gusset and feather stitching on a coat found in the case indicated it had been manufactured in the U.S. The coat had not been imported, indicating that the man had been to the United States or bought the coat from someone of similar size who had been. Police checked incoming train records and believed the man had arrived at Adelaide Railway by overnight train from either Melbourne, Sydney, or Port Augusta. They speculated that he had showered and shaved in the adjacent city baths, as there was no baths ticket on his body, before returning to the train station to purchase a ticket for 10:50 a.m. to Henley Beach, which for whatever reason he missed or did not catch. He immediately checked his suitcase at the station cloakroom before leaving the station, catching a bus to Glenelg. Although named City Baths, the center was not a public bathing facility, but rather a public swimming pool, and the railway station bathing facilities were adjacent to the station cloakroom, which itself was adjacent to the station's southern exit on North Terrace. The city baths along King William Street were accessible from the station's northern exit via a laneway. There's no record of the station's bathroom facilities being unavailable on the day he arrived. An inquest to the man's death conducted by Coroner Thomas Erskine Cleland commenced a few days after following the discovery of the body, but was adjourned until 17th of June 1949. Cleland, as the investigating pathologist, re-examined the body, made a number of discoveries. He noted that the man's shoes were remarkably clean and appeared to have been recently polished rather than in the condition expected of a man who had apparently been wandering around Glenelg all day. He added that this evidence fit in with the theory that the body may have been brought to Somerton Park after the man's death, accounting for the lack of evidence of vomiting and convulsions, which are the 2 main physiological reactions to poison. Cleland speculated, as none of the witnesses could positively identify the man they say they saw the previous night as the same person discovered the next morning, there remained the possibility that the man had died elsewhere and simply been dumped. He stressed that this was purely speculation, as all the witnesses believed it was. Definitely the same person, as the body was in the same place and lying in the same distinctive position. He also found no evidence indicating the identity of the deceased, which no one ever did. There was, of course, some mysteries and some puzzles and some poems, but we still don't know who the fuck it is. The best theory we have is that this guy might have been a spy, but at this point, we never will fucking know, will we? Dorde Martinovic incident. The Dorde Martinovic incident is the tale of how one man masturbating with a glass bottle can lead to a genocide. Yeah, that's right. Dorde Martinovic, a Serbian man who was, well, playing a significant role in worsening ethnic tensions between Kosovo's Serb and Albanian population, was masturbating with a glass bottle in his farm field. Or at least he says he wasn't. But he arrived at a local hospital with a broken bottle wedged in his rectum. He claimed he had been attacked by two Albanian-speaking men while he was working in his field. After being interrogated by Yugoslav People Army's colonel, Martinovic reportedly admitted that his injuries had been self-inflicted in a botched attempt at masturbation, but the prosecutor of the case said that, yeah, I don't believe that. I am much more willing to believe that two Albanian men randomly went ahead and shoved the bottle up your ass, Mr. Martinovic. Yeah, that's definitely interesting, right? And the facts of the incident remained in dispute for years afterwards, but it did wind up causing serious racial problems between the Serbian and Albanian populations of Kosovo. That's about the furthest I'm going to go into it, except for the fact that there was, of course, a poem written about it. Oh, so beautifully. I have to read it at this point. With a broken bottle on a stake, as through, a lamb but alive. It went through Dorde Martinovic, as if with their first and heavy steps into their future field they treaded. When out of the opium and pain, Dorde Martinovic came round, as if from the long past, Turkish times. He woke up on a stake. Now you might be wondering, what the fuck does this mean? Well, basically because Dorde Martinovic was, descended from the Turks, or at least somewhat related to them due to his Serbian heritage. The Albanian population believed that Dorde Martinovic and people like him were going to steal all of their land, and even though he had a broken glass bottle in his ass, he deserved it because
The immigrants should take a job.
you know that dumbass shit you hear Republicans preaching all the time? Yeah, basically that, but in Kosovo in the 90s. So yeah, that's the tale of how one man shoving a glass bottle up his ass worsened racial tensions, a massive deal. Kudos to you, lad. Kudos to you. And what do you know? We've done it. If you made it this far, I'd like to take a moment to genuinely thank you for watching this much of my video. It does mean the world to me that I can make these videos and have an audience. If you're new here, I do ask that you subscribe. I'm clearly mildly entertaining. You're clearly mildly bored. Win-win situation, and if you hate my guts, well, you can always undo it later. I'd like to thank everyone, subscribed or not, once again for making it this far. And until next time, have a wonderful time. Memento Mori.